Max Anderson had always been different. While most kids his age were glued to their video games or playing sports, Max spent his time tinkering with broken gadgets and reading books on rocket science. At just 10 years old, Max was already on the radar of some of the brightest minds in technology. But that day, March 15, 2025, was when everything in his life was about to change. It started with a letter. Max was sitting at the kitchen table, eating his breakfast, when his mother, Sarah, walked in holding an envelope. She looked puzzled, as if she couldn't quite figure out who would be sending a letter to her son. The envelope was sleek, white, and had no return address, just the SpaceX logo printed at the top. "Max," she said, her voice a mix of excitement and curiosity. "This came for you." Max looked up from his cereal, his interest piqued. The letter didn't look like anything he'd received before. He had never expected to get something from SpaceX. Sure, he'd sent them a few of his robotics projects in the past, hoping for feedback, but never expected anything in return. He took the envelope from his mother's hand and carefully tore it open. Inside was a letter printed on high-quality paper. The message inside was simple, yet it sent a thrill running down his spine. "Dear Max Anderson, we have been following your progress with great interest and believe that you possess the unique talent to change the future. As part of our mission to foster innovation, we would like to invite you to SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, for a meeting with Elon Musk himself. Please arrive at 9 a.m. on March 16. We look forward to seeing what you bring to the table. Sincerely, SpaceX Innovation Team." Max's hands shook as he read the letter twice. He felt a mix of excitement and disbelief. How could this be real? Was this some kind of prank? It couldn't be. SpaceX wasn't a company known for playing tricks on kids. This had to be real. Max looked at his mother, whose eyes were wide with surprise. "Mom," Max said, his voice barely a whisper, "this is real, isn't it?" Sarah was still holding the letter in shock, but then her expression softened into a smile. "I think it is, Max. I think this is real." Max's heart was racing. Elon Musk, the Elon Musk, wanted to meet him. The man who founded SpaceX, Tesla, and revolutionized space travel wanted to meet him. It seemed impossible. But the invitation was clear. It wasn't a joke. Elon Musk himself wanted to meet with Max, to talk about his ideas. Max had always dreamed of a day like this, but now that it was happening, he didn't know what to feel. "Are you sure you're ready for this?" his mom asked, still not quite believing the words she was speaking. Max nodded vigorously, his excitement growing. "I have to be ready. This could change everything." Max had spent years working on his projects, an AI-powered rover he'd built when he was 7, a low-energy engine he'd designed at 9, and most recently, a concept for a reusable spacecraft that could help bring people to Mars. He'd always dreamed of meeting Elon Musk, the genius behind so many groundbreaking technologies, but now that the moment was approaching, he wasn't sure if he was prepared. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Max thought about that question. For him, it was always the idea of making the impossible possible. He had always believed that no challenge was too great if you just kept pushing forward. The night before the meeting, Max couldn't sleep. He tossed and turned, thinking about all the things he could say to Elon Musk, and the questions he might ask. What if Elon didn't like his ideas? What if he made a mistake in front of him? The pressure felt overwhelming. Max sat up in bed and glanced over at his desk, where his latest invention lay, a prototype for a portable energy-efficient engine. It wasn't finished yet, but it was the closest he had come to something that could really make a difference in the world. He thought about the letter again. Elon Musk wanted to meet him. Maybe his invention would be the one to change everything. At 6 a.m., Max's mom woke him up. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a soft orange glow through the blinds. Max didn't feel nervous anymore. He felt determined. He had worked his entire life for an opportunity like this, and now it was time to show Elon Musk what he could do. The drive to the airport was long and quiet. Max couldn't help but stare out the window, thinking about the future. What if this was the beginning of something incredible? What if Elon Musk saw the potential in his work and decided to help him bring his ideas to life? The possibilities seemed endless. When they arrived at SpaceX, Max's stomach dropped. The buildings were massive, with futuristic designs that looked like something straight out of a science fiction movie. There were engineers and scientists walking in and out of the complex, each of them moving with purpose, their eyes focused on something far more important than Max's wild imagination. "Are you sure this is the place?" Max asked, feeling small in comparison to the sprawling headquarters. His mom nodded. "This is it, Max. The future is just one step away." They entered the building, where a receptionist greeted them and handed them security passes. Max's heart was still racing, but he knew there was no turning back now. He had been invited to meet Elon Musk, and he wasn't going to let this opportunity slip away. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? Max Anderson wasn't like other kids his age. While his peers were mastering Fortnite or obsessing over the latest trending TikTok dance, Max was more likely to be found hunched over a workbench in his bedroom, surrounded by piles of wires, circuit boards, and a variety of tools. For him, every broken gadget was a challenge, and every malfunction was a puzzle waiting to be solved. At just 10 years old, Max was already a name in certain circles, albeit one whispered among professors and engineers, not something you'd find in a typical school yearbook. His fascination with machines began when he was just 5 years old. His mother, Sarah, often told the story of how Max had disassembled his first toy car at the age of 3. She recalled walking into his room to find tiny plastic wheels scattered across the floor and him sitting there, delighted, as he tried to figure out how to put it back together. "You can't fix what isn't broken, Max," she had said then, but the look in his eyes told her everything. He wasn't just curious, he was driven by something deeper, a desire to understand how things worked, to unlock the mysteries hidden inside everyday objects. By the time Max was 7, he had already built his first robot, a simple machine that could move along the floor using sensors he had pieced together from old, discarded electronics. It wasn't perfect. The movements were jerky, and it occasionally bumped into walls, but Max was proud of it. He didn't just build things, he imagined them. And when his inventions didn't work, he saw that as an opportunity to learn, not as a failure. Max's talent didn't go unnoticed for long. His teachers were the first to spot his genius, and soon, his mother found herself receiving phone calls from professors at local universities, wondering if Max would be willing to participate in special projects or offer feedback on ongoing research. While some adults were impressed, others were skeptical. What could a 10-year-old possibly know about complex scientific concepts like artificial intelligence or space exploration? Max didn't mind. He never cared for conventional paths. He wasn't a typical child who wanted to grow up to be an astronaut or a scientist. He already was one, in his own way. Every book he devoured, every experiment he conducted, was part of his quest to understand the world in a way few others his age ever could. But despite his brilliance, Max wasn't immune to the challenges of growing up. While he excelled in everything related to science, his social life was a different story. He didn't quite fit in with other kids, who found him more of an enigma than a friend. While they were talking about the latest cartoons, Max was reciting facts about the International Space Station or theorizing about sustainable energy. This made it difficult to build friendships. Most kids didn't understand his enthusiasm, and some even thought he was showing off. His intelligence set him apart, sometimes, it isolated him. Still, Max wasn't alone. His mother, Sarah, had been his greatest supporter. She never once doubted him, even when he was working through his many late-night projects. Sarah, a schoolteacher, wasn't the most tech-savvy person, but she always found a way to encourage Max's creativity. She'd sit with him, listening patiently as he explained the intricacies of quantum mechanics or the concepts behind his latest invention, even if she didn't fully understand the terms. "Mom," Max would often say, "one day, I'll build something that will change everything. Maybe I'll make a rocket. Or a car that doesn't use gas. Or something that nobody's even thought of yet." Sarah would smile, adjusting her glasses and giving him a reassuring nod. "You'll do great things, Max. I just know it." But for Max, the pressure was mounting. He was a child prodigy, yes, but he didn't feel like a typical child. There were no mentors to guide him, no peers to collaborate with. He was constantly trying to stay ahead of the curve, working through ideas and prototypes while still trying to manage the expectations of his parents, teachers, and even himself. At school, Max was considered an oddity. His classmates, though well-meaning, didn't quite know how to interact with him. The other kids found his constant talk about space travel, robotics, and future technologies to be, well, a bit much. Some of them admired his intellect, but the friendship didn't extend beyond the occasional "cool" when they saw his inventions. It wasn't the same as hanging out after school to play soccer or trading Pokémon cards. Max had a few close friends, though, like Lucas, a boy who shared Max's love of video games and once spent an entire weekend helping him design a better controller. While Lucas didn't understand all of Max's projects, he appreciated Max's enthusiasm and never made him feel weird for his obsession with technology. There was also Lily, a neighbor who had been Max's best friend since they were toddlers. She was more artistic than scientific, but her creative spirit complemented Max's analytical mind. They often collaborated on projects. Lily would design the exterior of a machine, while Max would focus on the mechanics and coding. Together, they made a great team. She was the first person Max could trust with his wildest ideas. They'd spend hours in his garage, covered in oil stains and surrounded by metal parts, working on everything from self-driving cars to solar-powered gadgets. Despite his small circle of friends, Max felt like an outsider. But all that changed the moment he received the letter from SpaceX. Max was up before the sun the next morning, his body buzzing with anticipation. The meeting with Elon Musk wasn't just a chance to show off his inventions, it was a moment to prove himself, to see if the years of hard work, the countless hours spent tinkering in his room, and the endless ideas that only he could fully understand, would amount to something bigger. Something that could change the world. Max, honey, you need to get ready. Sarah called from downstairs. Max quickly shot out of bed, still half-dazed, and rushed to get dressed. His hands were shaking as he pulled on his favorite SpaceX t-shirt. He'd worn it so many times it was starting to fade, but it felt right for today. This wasn't just a meeting, it was a defining moment in his life. When he got downstairs, his mom had already prepared breakfast, but Max couldn't bring himself to eat. His mind was racing with thoughts of what the day would bring. What would Elon Musk think? Would he be impressed with Max's ideas, or would he dismiss them as just the ramblings of a child? "Mom, do you think I'm ready for this?" Max asked as he shoved his breakfast aside. Sarah smiled at him, though her eyes betrayed a trace of concern. "You've been ready for a long time, Max. Just remember, this is about sharing what you love, what you're passionate about. Don't overthink it. Just be yourself." Max nodded, but deep down, he couldn't help but feel the pressure. It wasn't every day a 10-year-old got a private invitation to meet the CEO of SpaceX. And even though Sarah was his biggest cheerleader, Max couldn't shake the feeling that his ideas might not be good enough. As they drove to the SpaceX headquarters in Hawthorne, California, the car ride felt surreal. Max stared out of the window, watching the landscape blur by, but his mind was a million miles away. The world of space exploration, advanced technology, and groundbreaking innovations that Elon Musk had created felt like a dream. And now, Max was about to step into that world. When they arrived at the SpaceX campus, Max was struck by the sheer scale of it all. The buildings were massive, designed with a futuristic sleekness that reminded him of the movies he loved so much. The entire facility felt like something out of a sci-fi story, a place where the impossible was made possible. "Here we are," Sarah said softly, as they parked in front of a large, modern-looking building. Max's heart pounded in his chest as they walked inside. A receptionist greeted them with a smile, and after a quick check-in, they were led through a maze of hallways and large conference rooms filled with engineers and scientists, all hard at work. The buzz of activity around them only made Max feel smaller, like a child in a room full of giants. Finally, they arrived at a large glass door with the SpaceX logo etched into it. The door opened, and they entered a conference room where Max could see a man standing near a large window, looking out at the SpaceX rockets lined up on the runway. "Elon Musk," the receptionist said, introducing the man who had made history with every step he took. "Mr. Musk, this is Max Anderson." Elon turned to face them, his piercing eyes immediately meeting Max's. The man was taller than Max had imagined, and his presence felt larger than life. Yet, there was something about the way he smiled, warm, genuine, that instantly put Max at ease. "Max," Elon said, extending his hand. "I'm really glad you could make it. I've heard a lot about you." Max shook his hand, still in awe of the moment. His mind was racing, trying to figure out what to say, but before he could speak, Elon gestured for them to sit. "So, Max," Elon began, sitting down at the head of the table, "I'm sure you've got some exciting ideas for us. I'm really curious to see what you've been working on. Why don't you start by telling me what's been inspiring you lately?" Max hesitated for a moment before speaking. It was hard to pinpoint just one inspiration, because for Max, everything around him fueled his passion. But he focused on one of his most recent projects, a new concept for a solar-powered propulsion system that he believed could one day power spacecraft on long-distance missions. "I've been working on a propulsion system," Max began, his voice steady but with a hint of nervous excitement. "It's solar-powered, but it uses a new method of energy storage that could be much more efficient than anything we have now. If it works, it could be the key to faster, more sustainable space travel." Elon leaned forward, intrigued. "That sounds very interesting. Tell me more about how it works." Max felt a wave of confidence wash over him as he explained his idea in greater detail. He spoke about energy conversion, storage techniques, and the potential to reduce the cost of space travel. His words flowed more easily now that he had Elon's attention. For the next few minutes, Max outlined his concept, showing Elon his sketches and prototypes. As he spoke, he could see the wheels turning in Elon's mind. Max couldn't help but notice how deeply Elon was engaged, nodding along and asking thoughtful questions. It was like speaking to someone who understood every word, every idea. Max felt like he was finally in the right place. But just as Max thought he was gaining some momentum, Elon paused and raised an eyebrow. "You've got some impressive ideas, Max," Elon said, leaning back in his chair. "But how do you plan to make this work on a larger scale? How will you take your idea from just a concept to something that could actually be used in space?" The question hit Max hard, a stark reminder of the gap between his ambitious ideas and the real-world challenges that came with them. Max had thought of a lot of things, but he had never really considered how he could bring his ideas to life. His thoughts flashed back to all the late nights spent in his bedroom, working on prototypes that never quite worked as he had hoped. Max had always been good at dreaming big, but the logistics, the practical aspects of making those dreams a reality, that was the part he had never fully figured out. For a moment, Max felt a wave of doubt wash over him. Was his idea truly ready? Had he missed something important? The confidence that had built up in him moments ago began to crumble, replaced by a feeling of uncertainty. Elon must have noticed the change in Max's demeanor because he quickly leaned forward, his voice softer now. "Don't worry, Max. These kinds of ideas don't happen overnight. They require a lot of work, a lot of failures before we get it right. But that's the fun part. You're on the right track. The next step is just figuring out how to move forward." Max looked up at him, his heart still racing. The weight of Elon's words settled over him, but strangely, it didn't feel like a failure. Instead, it felt like a challenge Max was ready to take on. "I'm ready," Max said, his voice more determined now. "I'll figure it out. I'll make it work." Elon smiled. "That's the spirit, Max. That's exactly what it takes." The weeks that followed Max's meeting with Elon Musk were a blur. The excitement of the encounter had fueled Max like never before. He spent every waking hour either working in his garage or devouring books and papers on space exploration, propulsion systems, and quantum energy. But even with all this newfound knowledge, Max couldn't shake one thought: what now? Elon had given him a lot to think about. The solar-powered propulsion system that Max had shared was ambitious, no doubt. But now, Max knew that taking it from concept to reality would be no easy feat. There were roadblocks to overcome, technical challenges to face, and a mountain of work to climb before he could even begin to make a tangible version of his idea. And yet, Max's resolve was unwavering. The spark Elon had ignited within him continued to burn brighter than ever. He had a vision, and now he had a roadmap, albeit an incomplete one, for how to bring that vision to life. "Failure isn't the end," Elon's words echoed in Max's mind as he sat hunched over a stack of technical manuals in his bedroom. "It's part of the journey." With those words, Max understood. Failure was something that had always haunted him. He had spent countless hours in his garage working on different inventions that never quite worked the way he wanted them to. But what if failure wasn't a bad thing? What if it was simply the next step towards something greater? Max set down the book and glanced at the half-completed prototype of his propulsion system on the workbench. It had taken him weeks to even get it to this point, and it was far from perfect. The system was inefficient, the energy output inconsistent, and it was far too bulky to be used in real-world applications. But Max wasn't discouraged. If anything, these flaws were motivating him to push further, to experiment more, to refine his ideas. One evening, as he worked late into the night, there was a knock on the door. "Max?" It was his mom, Sarah, her voice cutting through the silence of the room. "You've been in here for hours. Why don't you take a break?" Max didn't look up immediately. He was too focused on adjusting the wiring in his prototype. But Sarah's voice was persistent, warm and familiar, and he knew she wasn't going to let him off the hook that easily. "I can't, Mom," Max said, his voice tinged with exhaustion. "I have to get this right. I promised myself, and Mr. Musk, that I'd figure this out." Sarah stepped into the room and crossed the floor to where Max was sitting. She peered down at the jumble of wires, motors, and flashing lights on his workbench. "I know you're working hard," she said softly. "But don't forget to take care of yourself too. You've been at this for days without a break. Even geniuses need rest." Max paused, glancing up at her. For a moment, he felt a pang of guilt. His mom had been nothing but supportive, but in his obsession with the propulsion system, he hadn't realized how much time had passed. He hadn't even taken a proper break or slept. He had been so consumed by his mission that he hadn't noticed how much he was wearing himself down. "I just want to get this right, Mom," Max said, his voice small, almost childlike. "I don't want to disappoint anyone." Sarah's expression softened, and she sat down next to him. "Max, you could never disappoint me. But you need to remember that success doesn't always happen overnight. Take your time. Learn from your failures. It's okay to step back and breathe." Max nodded, but the frustration still lingered in the back of his mind. He was so close, he could feel it. But he also knew that he was standing at the edge of something much larger than he could have imagined. The propulsion system was just the beginning. If he wanted to truly make a difference, he would need to push beyond what he thought was possible. That night, Max took a rare break and spent some time with Sarah, chatting about anything and everything except his work. For the first time in days, he allowed himself to relax. But even as they laughed together, Max's mind never fully strayed from the task at hand. In the coming days, Max would face an even greater challenge than just perfecting his invention. Elon Musk's words had left a lasting impression on him. He had already set the wheels in motion for something revolutionary, but now, Max was beginning to realize that the journey would not be as simple as building a few prototypes. The road ahead would be filled with uncertainty, and there would be moments when he would question himself. Max wasn't just building a propulsion system, he was embarking on a path that could change the world. And that realization filled him with a mix of awe and fear. The closer he got to success, the more he started to understand the weight of his ambitions. Max sat in his room late into the night, the blue light from his computer screen casting long shadows across the walls. The summit was just days away. The idea of presenting his propulsion system in front of a room full of the brightest minds in technology, and Elon Musk himself, felt like a dream he was on the verge of waking up from. He had come so far, and yet, so much still needed to be done. His prototype was still far from perfect. The solar-powered propulsion system had been showing some promise in the lab, but there were still issues with energy conversion, and the energy output was wildly inconsistent. It wasn't ready. Not by a long shot. And yet, the summit was approaching, and there was no way to delay it. Max had spent countless hours in the garage, adjusting and reassembling parts, checking every wire and connection, but no matter what he did, the system wasn't working as it should. It was an emotional roller coaster. He had moments of breakthroughs, followed by crushing setbacks. Each time he thought he was on the edge of success, something else went wrong. His mind raced as he ran over the issues. He had to solve this. He had to make it work. He ran his fingers through his hair, feeling the weight of the situation press down on him. The uncertainty, the pressure, the fear of failure, it was all too much. He could feel the doubt creeping in, like a shadow in the back of his mind, whispering that he wasn't ready. That his idea was too big. That he was just a kid who had no place in a world of experts. Max had never been afraid of hard work, but this time it was different. He wasn't just trying to prove something to himself. He was trying to prove to everyone, including Elon Musk, that he was capable of something extraordinary. And yet, the closer he got to the summit, the more it seemed like the dream was slipping further and further away. "Max, you need to rest," his mom's voice broke through his thoughts. She was standing at the door of his room, looking concerned. "You've been at this for hours. It's late. Maybe you just need to take a break." Max didn't even look up from his desk. "I can't, Mom. If I stop now, it's over. I won't be ready." Sarah stepped into the room and sat next to him, her hand gently resting on his shoulder. "Max, I know you want this more than anything, but sometimes taking a step back can help you see things more clearly. You don't have to do this alone. You've come so far, and that's something to be proud of. No matter what happens at the summit, you've already achieved something incredible." Max's chest tightened as he finally met his mom's gaze. The words hit him harder than he expected. He wasn't sure if he could hear that right now. Everything felt so fragile. Everything felt like it was on the edge of falling apart. "I don't know if I can do this, Mom," Max admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. "What if I fail? What if it's all for nothing?" Sarah's eyes softened, her voice soothing and calm. "Max, failure is a part of success. It doesn't define you. What matters is that you tried. What matters is that you kept going, even when it was hard. And no matter what happens, I'm proud of you. You've inspired so many people already, most of all, me." Max swallowed hard, feeling a lump form in his throat. It wasn't that he didn't believe his mom. He did. He had always felt her unwavering support. But in this moment, standing on the edge of a dream that might shatter in front of him, her words didn't feel like enough. Max wanted to believe that failure wouldn't define him, but the fear of it, of being seen as just a kid who tried and failed, gnawed at him. What if Elon Musk, the man who had inspired him to think bigger than anyone else, saw his project as a joke. What if everyone saw him as a mere child playing at something far beyond his years? I don't know if I can take that risk, Max said, his voice trembling. For a long moment, Sarah didn't say anything. Then, she stood up, walked over to his desk, and gently placed her hand on the blueprint he had been working on. You've already taken the biggest risk, she said, her tone firm and comforting. You've put yourself out there. You've dared to dream, and that's something most people will never do. It's not about the outcome, it's about the courage to try. And I believe in you, Max. No matter what happens at the summit, you've already made a difference. Max felt the weight in his chest lighten a little as her words sank in. There was truth in them. The dream, the ambition, the desire to change the world, it was all a risk. But wasn't that what made it worthwhile? Thanks, Mom, Max said, his voice steadier now. I needed to hear that. She smiled warmly at him. Of course. Now, take a break. You've earned it. Max nodded, and for the first time in days, he allowed himself to leave his work behind and sit with his mom. They didn't talk about the summit, or the propulsion system, or the future. They just spent time together, laughing and chatting like they used to. It was a small moment, but it gave Max the peace he had been searching for. As the night wore on and Max went to bed, his mind was still full of thoughts about the summit. But something had shifted inside him. The fear of failure was still there, but it no longer controlled him. The pressure was still immense, but he had learned that the most important part of this journey wasn't perfection, it was the courage to continue, to keep going despite the unknowns. The day of the summit arrived all too quickly. Max stood in front of the mirror, adjusting his shirt, trying to calm his nerves. He wasn't sure if he was ready, but he had a feeling that it didn't matter. What mattered was that he was there, that he had the chance to share his idea with the world. He took a deep breath and made a silent promise to himself. No matter what happened today, he would give it his all. Because in the end, the journey itself was just as important as the destination. With a final glance at the blueprint of his propulsion system, Max grabbed his bag and walked out the door. It was time. The silence in the auditorium felt deafening as Max stood on stage, heart pounding in his chest. He had just finished explaining his solar-powered propulsion system to the crowd, and now the moment of truth had arrived. The audience was silent, eyes fixed on him, waiting for a response. His palms were slick with sweat, and he was acutely aware of how his breath felt shallow, as though the weight of the world was pressing down on his chest. A few moments passed before Elon Musk, who had been sitting in the front row with his arms crossed, leaned forward in his seat. The murmur in the room grew louder as the audience exchanged glances, their curiosity piqued. Max took another deep breath, trying to steady himself. Finally, Elon stood up, a small smile tugging at the corner of his lips. Well, Elon said, his voice steady and calm but with an edge of intrigue, that was interesting. Max's heart skipped a beat. He had no idea what Elon really thought, but the fact that he had described the presentation as interesting didn't quite feel like a compliment, or an insult. Max wiped his hands on his pants, trying to keep his composure. Thank you, he said, his voice cracking slightly. I believe this propulsion system could change how we approach space travel, not just in the commercial industry but also for sustainable energy solutions on Earth. Elon nodded thoughtfully, walking toward the stage. He gestured for Max to step aside as he moved to the front. The audience quieted even further, anticipation thick in the air. Elon stood in front of the large screen, the blueprint of Max's propulsion system displayed behind him, and he studied it with sharp, appraising eyes. You've clearly put a lot of work into this, Elon said slowly, turning to Max with a measured gaze. The concepts here are ambitious. Very ambitious. He paused. But ambition isn't enough. It's about practicality. Feasibility. Can your system generate enough energy without being too heavy? Can it be scaled for real-world use? And most importantly, will it hold up under pressure? Max's throat tightened. He knew Elon was right. These were the very questions he had been asking himself during the late nights in his garage. He had wondered, hoped, and even feared that his design might not be practical enough. But he had always pushed those doubts aside, driven by a singular focus on the dream. "I believe it can be done," Max replied, forcing himself to meet Elon's gaze. "It's about testing, refining, and adapting. I'm not saying it's perfect, but I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it work." Elon's eyes softened slightly as he considered Max's words. "I admire your tenacity," he said quietly. "It's rare to see someone so young with such a clear vision. But let me be clear, you're about to face a lot of obstacles. There will be setbacks, failures, and moments when you'll feel like giving up." Max felt his stomach drop at the mention of failure. It was something he had always feared but never truly faced. He had spent so much time trying to perfect the propulsion system in his garage, and now here he was, standing on stage, in front of the person he admired most, being told that failure was not just possible, it was inevitable. "But it's in those moments of failure," Elon continued, his voice firm, "that you will learn the most. And if you truly want to make this a reality, you need to embrace those failures, learn from them, and keep pushing forward. Just because it's difficult doesn't mean it's impossible." Max swallowed hard, his thoughts racing. He could feel the weight of Elon's words, like a challenge being placed squarely in his lap. The dream had always seemed like it was just within reach, but now he understood, it wasn't just about building the propulsion system. It was about persevering through the impossible. It was about resilience, innovation, and, most importantly, a willingness to fail and try again. For a moment, the entire auditorium seemed to blur, and Max was lost in his own thoughts. The dream that had kept him up at night, the one that had fueled his every step, felt both terrifying and exhilarating now. He had a long road ahead, and the stakes were higher than he had ever imagined. Suddenly, he heard the audience clap, and he realized he had been holding his breath. The applause wasn't overwhelming, but it was respectful, and he couldn't help but feel a surge of pride. Max looked up at Elon, whose expression was still serious but not unkind. "You've got potential, Max," Elon said. "You've got the right mindset. I'll be watching your progress. Keep pushing. Keep building." Max nodded, unable to find his voice at first. He wanted to say so much, to thank Elon for this chance, for the inspiration, for the validation. But instead, he simply whispered, "Thank you." Elon smiled, giving him a nod. "Good luck. You'll need it." As Max stepped off the stage, his head was spinning. The audience slowly began to file out, but he was still standing there, staring at the empty space where the projection of his propulsion system had once been. His mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, fear, excitement, doubt, and hope. What now? Where did he go from here? Suddenly, Claire from SpaceX appeared at his side. She gave him a reassuring smile. "Hey, you did great up there. Don't let any of this overwhelm you. This is just the beginning. You've got this." Max nodded, the weight of her words sinking in. The whole day had been a blur, but now, he had a clearer sense of what came next: more work, more learning, more testing, and, inevitably, more failure. But each failure would be a stepping stone. Each failure would take him one step closer to his goal. As he left the auditorium, Max felt a shift within him. The uncertainty hadn't disappeared, it was still there, lurking in the background. But now, it didn't feel so suffocating. Elon had given him a gift, the permission to fail, to learn, and to grow. Max had taken the first step towards something monumental, but it was clear that the journey was far from over. In fact, it was just beginning. And this time, he wasn't afraid of failure. He was ready for it. Because in the world he was trying to create, failure was just another word for progress. The road ahead was long, but for the first time, Max felt ready to walk it. The weeks following the summit were a blur of sleepless nights, endless calculations, and late-night phone calls with Claire from SpaceX. Max had been working tirelessly to refine his propulsion system, but the pressure to get it right had never felt so overwhelming. It wasn't just about his dream anymore, it was about proving to Elon Musk, to his family, and to himself that he could actually make this work. Max had spent years reading about propulsion, space travel, and sustainable energy, but now, with a prototype in his hands, those theoretical concepts were suddenly real. It was one thing to read about breakthroughs, it was another thing entirely to try to create one. Each day felt like a race against time. Max had made some progress, but the system still wasn't functioning the way he had hoped. The energy output remained inconsistent, and even after making adjustments, the results were still far from perfect. But he refused to give up. Every failure, every setback only fueled his determination further. "I've got to figure this out," he muttered to himself as he pored over his notes late one night. The sound of his fingers tapping on the keyboard echoed through the quiet room, his mind a whirlwind of calculations and equations. Max could feel the weight of the problem, like an invisible force pressing down on him. As he stared at the screen, a small notification pinged in the corner of his laptop. It was a message from Claire. "Claire, hey Max, I've got some good news. Elon's team is interested in seeing an update on your project. They want to see your progress in 2 weeks." Max's heart skipped a beat. 2 weeks. That wasn't enough time to solve all of the issues he was facing, not by a long shot. But at the same time, this was the break he had been waiting for. It wasn't just another chance, it was the chance. He had to take it. 2 weeks. "I can do this," Max typed back, though he didn't believe it for a second. The next morning, Max woke up with a new sense of urgency. He couldn't afford to waste any more time. Every moment counted now. He started making calls to his mentors, researching more solutions, and diving deeper into the problem at hand. The thought of facing Elon's team again, this time with the weight of real-world expectations on his shoulders, was daunting. But it also gave him the drive to push through. "Okay, Max muttered as he sketched out new designs and ran more simulations. "If I change the energy distribution here, and adjust the reactor core to increase stability, maybe that'll work." The next several days were a whirlwind. Max slept only a few hours each night, working tirelessly to test, adjust, and perfect his propulsion system. His friends, Sarah, and even his mom, noticed the shift in him. He was more determined, more focused, but also more withdrawn. He barely had time to eat or sleep, and the stress was beginning to show. But Max refused to slow down. The thought of letting go of his dream, of falling short after all this work, was unbearable. He had come too far to stop now. As the days passed, Max slowly began to see progress. The energy output started stabilizing, and the propulsion system began to run more efficiently. It wasn't perfect, far from it, but it was starting to resemble the vision he had all those months ago. The breakthroughs felt like small victories, but they were victories nonetheless. Then, just days before his scheduled meeting with Elon's team, disaster struck. Max was in the lab, running another test of the system when an electrical short circuit caused a surge of energy to ripple through the entire setup. Sparks flew, and Max jumped back as the equipment buzzed loudly, flickering on and off. He quickly turned off the power, his heart racing as he assessed the damage. The prototype was fried. The main reactor was completely destroyed. It was a setback that could set him back for weeks. Max's stomach sank. This wasn't just a minor malfunction, it was a major blow. And with only days to go before his presentation, it felt like everything was falling apart. Max stood there in disbelief, staring at the damaged system. His dream, his vision, felt so close, yet so far away. How could he fix this in time? He couldn't afford to fail now. "I can't give up," he whispered to himself. "I've come too far." But as the hours ticked by, doubt crept in. Was it even possible to fix this in time? He could feel the pressure mounting. The weight of it all was suffocating. His phone buzzed again, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts. It was Claire. "Claire, I know things are tough right now, but you've got this. We're behind you. You've already made it this far. Let's keep pushing." Max stared at the message, reading it over and over again. It was exactly what he needed to hear. Claire was right. He couldn't let this setback define him. He had been up against the odds before, and every time, he had come out stronger. He just needed to focus. He needed to fix this. Without wasting another second, Max dove back into his work. He contacted his mentor at the university for advice on electrical engineering, worked with Sarah to source new parts, and spent the next 48 hours meticulously rebuilding the system. Every moment felt like a battle against time, but Max's resolve only grew stronger. Finally, just hours before the presentation, the system was up and running again. It wasn't perfect, but it was a huge improvement from where it had started. Max's heart pounded in his chest as he stood in front of the prototype, taking a deep breath. This was it. The moment he had been working for. He called Claire to give her the update, and she responded with excitement. "Max, you're going to nail this. I believe in you." And with that, Max felt a wave of confidence wash over him. He wasn't just presenting a piece of technology, he was presenting a piece of his heart. All the late nights, all the doubt, all the failure, it had all led him to this point. Max knew the road ahead would still be full of obstacles. There was still so much to learn, so much to prove. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face whatever came next. He was on the cusp of something bigger than himself, and nothing could hold him back now. Max's heart raced as Elon Musk's words echoed in his mind. "This is good, Max. This is exactly the kind of innovation we need." Those words felt like a validation, like everything he had been working for, every sleepless night, every broken part, every moment of doubt, had led to this single moment of recognition. But as the applause slowly died down and the meeting continued, Max knew that the road ahead was far from over. Elon had said it himself, this was just the beginning. The room fell into a calm silence after the applause subsided. Elon stood up from his seat, pacing slowly across the floor as he absorbed the details of the prototype. The SpaceX team sat quietly, eyes glued to the screen, their expressions thoughtful but guarded. Max was trying to read their reactions, trying to gauge what was coming next. He felt as if every word he spoke would be scrutinized, measured, dissected. After a few moments, Elon stopped pacing and turned to face Max. "You've done something impressive here, Max," he said, his voice calm but carrying an air of authority. "The technology has potential. But you need to be prepared. Space exploration is a field where even the slightest flaw can mean failure. You're on the right track, but there are a few key things that need to be addressed before we take the next step." Max's heart sank slightly. Of course. Nothing was ever easy. But he nodded, determined not to let the weight of Elon's words break his resolve. "What do you need me to fix?" he asked, trying to sound more confident than he felt. Elon glanced over his shoulder at the team, and then back at Max. "You need to focus on the energy storage and efficiency. The system's power is impressive, but the energy storage unit isn't optimized for long-term use. You'll also need to refine the interface between the propulsion system and the vessel. It's too delicate right now, too many variables that could cause malfunctions. Lastly, you're going to need to scale this. If you're going to make this a reality, it needs to be capable of sustaining multiple uses, at larger scales, without constant recalibration." Max took in every word, mentally taking notes. "I understand," he said, his voice steady. "I'll get to work on it right away." Elon nodded, his eyes locking onto Max's. "Good. I believe in this, Max. I think you're onto something that could change the game. But you're not alone in this. I'll have my team work with you. Let's make this happen." The room fell into a quiet hum as the team began discussing technical details. Max felt a sense of surrealism wash over him as he processed Elon's words. "I think you're onto something that could change the game." Those words repeated in his mind. He had made it. He had gone from a kid in his garage to standing in front of one of the most powerful men in the world of innovation, and now, he was being given the opportunity to help build the future. As the meeting continued, Max couldn't help but feel a strange mix of excitement and anxiety. There was so much to do. So much to fix. But for the first time, he wasn't alone in this. Elon's team would be there, guiding him, pushing him to be better, to think bigger. Max could see the path ahead more clearly now, and though the journey would be long and fraught with challenges, he was ready to take it on. Later that evening, Max walked back to his apartment, his mind still racing from the meeting. The city lights seemed to blur as he walked the familiar streets, his thoughts consumed by the enormity of what was to come. The world around him felt distant, as though he was no longer just a part of it, but an observer watching from the outside. He had always dreamed of moments like this. Of changing the world. Of being a part of something bigger than himself. But now that it was happening, it felt like the weight of those dreams had become a tangible thing. Max stopped at a park bench and sat down, staring up at the night sky. It had always been his escape, the place where he could dream freely. Now, as he sat under the vast expanse of stars, it hit him. This wasn't just about the propulsion system anymore. It was about creating something that would truly change the course of humanity. He thought back to the moment when he first decided to build his propulsion system, when he had nothing but a sketchpad and a burning desire to make a difference. He had been naive, thinking that with enough passion and dedication, everything would fall into place. But now, the reality of the challenge ahead was clear. The stakes were higher than ever. "Max," a voice suddenly interrupted his thoughts. He looked up to see Claire standing a few feet away, her expression filled with that same supportive smile that had helped him push through countless obstacles. She sat down beside him without waiting for an invitation, her eyes glancing up at the stars as well. "You did it," she said softly. "You impressed them. You know that, right?" Max gave her a small smile, his mind still reeling. "Yeah, but there's still so much to fix. They gave me a lot of feedback, and some of it, it's going to be tough." Claire nodded, her tone serious but encouraging. "You're not alone in this, Max. You've got a whole team now. They believe in you. Elon believes in you." Max let out a long breath, finally letting the tension in his body ease. I don't know. I guess I thought that once I had their attention, it would be easier. But now, it feels even harder." "That's how it works," Claire said, her voice steady and wise beyond her years. "The more people believe in you, the more responsibility you have. The more pressure there is to succeed. But you're ready for this. You've already proven that." Max thought about that for a moment. He had already proven so much to himself, but now he had to prove it to the world. He had to turn his dream into a reality, not just for himself, but for everyone who believed in him. "I'm not sure I can do it alone," Max admitted, his voice quieter now. "I feel like there's just so much to learn, so much to fix, and I'm not sure if I have what it takes." Claire placed a hand on his shoulder, her touch warm and reassuring. "You're not alone, Max, remember that." Max looked at her, his expression filled with gratitude. "Thanks, Claire. I don't know what I'd do without you." She smiled. "You'll figure it out. And you'll make it happen. I believe in you." With that, the two sat in silence, watching the stars above. Max didn't have all the answers yet, and the road ahead would undoubtedly be full of challenges. But for the first time in a long time, he felt ready to face them. With the support of his team, his mentors, and the belief of those who cared about him, he knew he could take the next step. The future was wide open. And this time, he wasn't afraid to chase it. The following weeks were a blur of activity. Max's days were consumed with the technical aspects of refining his propulsion system, consulting with Elon's engineers, and working alongside Claire, who remained his most trusted ally. They spent long hours in the lab, sometimes so absorbed in their work that they lost track of time. But for Max, the excitement and pressure were palpable. This was his chance to make history. Elon's team had been working with him on multiple fronts. While Max focused on the propulsion system, Claire had been handling the development of the power storage unit. Together, they made progress, incrementally, but surely. Yet, there was always a lingering sense of urgency. Every breakthrough felt temporary until it was tested thoroughly. Every victory was followed by more setbacks, and Max had come to understand that this process was inevitable. One evening, Max sat hunched over his desk, scanning the latest data from the propulsion system test. His fingers hovered over the keyboard, inputting corrections in real time as he analyzed the discrepancies. The test results were not ideal. The propulsion system wasn't achieving the expected output. Again. Come on, Max muttered under his breath, his fingers moving faster, racing against time. He'd thought he had it figured out. Everything seemed in place, until now. This wasn't just an adjustment. This was a critical failure. Claire walked into the lab, looking over his shoulder. She could immediately tell something was wrong. Another failure, she asked softly, her tone concerned. Max pushed his hair back, clearly frustrated. Yeah. I've run the numbers 100 times, and it's still not right. I just don't get it. He leaned back in his chair and stared at the screen, his mind racing. Claire sat down beside him, glancing at the data. It could be the calibration on the reactor. Or maybe the secondary component isn't synchronized correctly. Have you tried recalibrating the core system? Max shook his head. I've tried everything. This doesn't make sense. It was working earlier in the week, and now it's like it's back to square one. Max slumped forward, resting his elbows on the desk, defeated for the moment. I've been at this for weeks, Claire. I thought I was close to a breakthrough. But now, I'm not even sure if we can make this work. She didn't respond right away, instead taking a deep breath. After a long moment, she placed a hand on his shoulder. Max, you've come this far. It's not over. You've faced worse, remember? Max sighed, but he couldn't ignore the mounting pressure. The timeline was closing in, and every failure felt like a failure to everyone who was counting on him. Elon. His family. His mentors. He knew that if he didn't come through, the opportunity to work with SpaceX, perhaps even the chance to make a true impact in space travel, might slip through his fingers. I know you're right, Max replied, his voice tinged with frustration. But this is different. I'm not just trying to make a cool tech toy. This is something that could change the world. I can't mess this up. Claire looked at him thoughtfully. Max, the only way to mess up is to quit. And I know that's not something you're going to do. Max took a deep breath, trying to calm his nerves. You're right. But it feels like everything's riding on this, and the stakes keep getting higher. He paused, his gaze lingering on the screen in front of him. What if I'm just not cut out for this? What if I can't fix it? Before Claire could respond, Max's phone buzzed, cutting through the tension. It was a message from Elon. Elon Musk, Max, I've seen the latest results. I want to meet with you in 2 days. There are a few things we need to discuss. Max's stomach tightened. He couldn't afford to fail, especially not now. This is it, he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire gave him an encouraging smile. You'll figure it out. We always do. Let's take a step back, run some fresh tests, and see if we can spot anything you might have missed. Max nodded, though the weight of Elon's message lingered. He knew the meeting would be crucial. This was his chance to explain his side, to show that he was committed to solving the problems. But he also feared what might happen if he didn't have a solid solution ready. 2 days later, Max arrived at the SpaceX headquarters, his mind still racing with what-ifs. Elon's team was already gathered when he walked into the conference room, the atmosphere thick with anticipation. He could feel the eyes of the engineers on him as he set his bag down and took a seat. Elon sat at the head of the table, his expression unreadable. Max couldn't tell whether he was pleased with the progress or disappointed. "You've been putting in a lot of work," Elon said, his voice measured. "And I can see the potential in your design. But the system isn't functioning the way we need it to. You're running out of time, Max. And if we can't get this right, we'll have to walk away." Max swallowed hard, the pressure intensifying in his chest. He had expected this. He had been warned that the stakes were high. But hearing it from Elon, hearing how close he was to failure, made everything feel even more real. "I understand," Max said, trying to keep his voice steady. "But I think I know what the issue is. The core isn't interacting well with the external components. There's a miscalibration in the energy distribution. If I can adjust the fuel synthesis process, I should be able to increase the efficiency." Elon's eyes narrowed slightly, and he leaned back in his chair. "That's a start. But time is ticking, Max. I need to see real progress. We're not going to wait forever." Max nodded, his resolve hardening. He couldn't afford to back down now. "I'll make it work," Max said firmly. "You'll see the results." Elon gave him a long, thoughtful look. "I hope so. You've got 2 weeks." As the meeting ended, Max felt both a sense of urgency and a growing determination. He had no more time to waste. It was now or never. The breakthrough came as a wave of relief, but Max knew better than to rest on his laurels. He had solved one problem, but there were still many more to face. It wasn't enough to simply fix one part of the system, the propulsion unit needed to function flawlessly, and Max had just opened the door to a new world of complexity. He spent the following days working around the clock, trying to perfect the adjustments. His mind was a whirlwind of equations and technicalities, constantly evolving as new challenges presented themselves. The lab had become his home, with Claire by his side, helping him wherever she could. Together, they tackled every issue as it arose, but one thing was clear: progress wasn't as fast as it used to be. Max couldn't shake the feeling that something bigger was coming. It wasn't just the pressure of the ticking clock, or Elon's looming deadline, it was something intangible, a strange, looming sense of doubt. He had come this far, but the stakes were higher now, and failure felt more real than ever. It wasn't long before a new complication arose. Just as they were preparing to run another set of tests, the propulsion system unexpectedly failed during a routine procedure. The lights in the lab flickered, and the monitors displayed an error code that Max didn't recognize. "Not again," Max muttered under his breath, his fingers flying over the keyboard as he tried to diagnose the issue. Claire was already at his side, her face reflecting the same confusion. The system wasn't just malfunctioning, it was malfunctioning in a way they hadn't anticipated. "What happened?" Claire asked, her voice sharp with concern. Max was silent for a moment as he analyzed the data. Then, he said something that chilled him to the core. "It's the reactor. There's a fundamental flaw in the design I didn't catch before. It's unstable." His heart skipped a beat. They had been so focused on the propulsion unit and power distribution, they had overlooked the reactor's efficiency. The entire foundation of the project was now in question. "You're sure?" Claire asked, her voice tight with anxiety. Max nodded grimly. "I've been looking at the diagnostics, and everything points to the reactor. It's too unpredictable. One more test, and we could lose everything." The gravity of the situation hit them both like a ton of bricks. Without the reactor functioning properly, the entire system was compromised. All the work they had put into the propulsion unit, the adjustments to the power storage system, all of it would be meaningless if they couldn't fix the core. Max rubbed his temples, the pressure mounting. "I need to fix this, Claire. I can't afford to fail now." We don't have the luxury of time anymore. Claire was quiet for a moment before speaking. You've got 2 weeks left, Max. And you're right, we don't have time to waste. But this? This is big. We'll need to go back to the drawing board and rethink the whole thing. I know it's not what you want to hear, but this may take a lot longer than we thought. Max stared at the screen, feeling the weight of her words settle over him like a storm cloud. He had already been working relentlessly for weeks. But now, with everything on the line, he had to ask himself, was he really ready for this? Before he could respond, his phone buzzed with a new message. It was from Elon. Elon Musk, Max, I've been informed about the situation. I need you to come to the headquarters immediately. We need to have a conversation about the next steps. Max let out a breath he hadn't realized he was holding. The message was brief, to the point. He could feel the tension building, knowing that the time had come to face Elon directly. I'll go, Max said after a moment, his voice steady despite the pounding in his chest. We'll figure this out. When Max arrived at SpaceX's headquarters, he was met by Elon and a few of his top engineers. There was an air of urgency in the room, the weight of expectation palpable. Max felt his pulse quicken as he took a seat across from Elon. Max, Elon said, his voice low but firm, I've been briefed on the situation. It's clear to me that there's a critical flaw in the reactor. And unless we address it, we won't be able to move forward. Max nodded, already feeling the sting of disappointment. He had hoped, even for a moment, that it would turn out to be a small issue. But Elon was right. This was the breaking point. I understand, Elon, Max said, his voice measured. I've already started analyzing it. But the reactor's instability is going to take more than a simple fix. We may have to go back to square one and rethink the entire design. Elon's eyes narrowed as he processed Max's words. There was a moment of silence, and Max could feel the weight of Elon's gaze on him. This was the moment that would define his future, and it felt like every second was stretching out in front of him. I see, Elon said at last, his tone unreadable. And what is your plan, Max? How do you intend to fix this? Max hesitated for a moment, the enormity of the problem hitting him once again. I have a few ideas, he said, swallowing his uncertainty. It's going to require recalibrating the reactor's core, along with a more robust power stabilization system. But the time frame is tight. If we're going to meet the deadline, we need to move fast. Elon leaned back in his chair, his fingers steepled in front of his face as he considered Max's words. I don't need to remind you of the stakes here, Elon said, his voice cutting through the tension. This isn't just about technology, it's about making history. And I've seen what you're capable of. I believe in you, Max. But I need results. If you can fix this, we move forward. If you can't, well, we'll have to consider other options. Max's heart thudded in his chest, and for a moment, the room seemed to close in around him. This was it. No turning back now. There was no room for failure. I'll fix it, Max said, his voice unwavering. I won't stop until it's right. Elon nodded, his expression softening slightly. I'm counting on you. Don't let us down. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The air in the lab was thick with tension as Max pored over the calculations on his screen. The clock was ticking, and with each passing hour, the pressure mounted. Elon's words echoed in his mind, if you can't fix this, we'll have to consider other options. The weight of that ultimatum felt like an anchor dragging him deeper into uncertainty. Max sat back, rubbing his eyes, his brain whirring with equations and theoretical models. He had spent days trying to address the reactor's instability, but the deeper he dug, the more complex the issue became. It wasn't just a matter of recalibrating or adjusting a few components, it was fundamental, a core flaw in the design that had gone unnoticed in the rush to build something revolutionary. It was like trying to solve a puzzle, except the pieces kept changing shape. Claire had been by his side through it all, tirelessly helping him with the simulations and reworking the designs. She could see the frustration in his eyes, the moments when he would pause and stare at the screen, as if hoping the solution would reveal itself. But Max knew better than to wait for answers to appear out of thin air. This was a problem that demanded action, and every moment of inaction was another step closer to failure. "Max," Claire said, breaking the silence. "Maybe we're looking at this all wrong. We're trying to force the system to work as we designed it, but what if we're missing something fundamental?" Max turned to her, eyebrows furrowed. "What do you mean? What if the instability isn't a flaw in the design, but in our understanding of how the reactor interacts with the rest of the system? Maybe the core needs a different kind of energy input, something we didn't anticipate. We've been working with the assumption that the system works a certain way, but maybe that's not the case." Max thought about it for a moment, his mind racing. Claire had a point. They had been so focused on the technical side of things that they hadn't questioned the core assumption of how the reactor functioned. What if the energy source was the issue? What if the reactor needed something entirely different, something that hadn't been considered during the initial design? He tapped a few keys on his keyboard, opening up a set of files that contained early-stage research into alternative energy sources for the reactor. His mind went into overdrive as he studied the data, looking for any clues that could help him unlock the solution. There, buried within the old research, was a theory he had overlooked, a potential method for stabilizing the reactor using a different type of energy field. "Claire," Max said, excitement creeping into his voice, "I think I've found something. It's a new method of energy synchronization, something we didn't factor in. If we can adapt the reactor to work with this energy source, it might stabilize the system." Claire leaned in to examine the data. "This is it, isn't it? You think this could fix the reactor?" "I don't know yet," Max replied, "but it's the best lead we've had so far. If we can recalibrate the reactor to accept this energy source, we might be able to eliminate the instability." They worked through the night, reconfiguring the reactor's core based on the new theory. The energy source was unconventional, but Max believed it was the key. As the hours passed, they adjusted the settings, made modifications to the core, and ran simulations to test their hypothesis. It was an exhausting process, but for the first time in days, Max felt a flicker of hope. By the time the sun rose, they were ready to test the new configuration. Max was on edge, his nerves frayed from lack of sleep, but he couldn't afford to wait any longer. This test was make or break. "Ready?" Claire asked, standing by the control panel. Max nodded, taking a deep breath. "Let's do it." He pressed the button to initiate the test, his fingers shaking slightly. The lab hummed to life as the reactor powered up, the energy fields within the system adjusting to the new configuration. Max watched the monitors closely, his heart pounding in his chest as the system began to stabilize. This was it. The moment of truth. For a few agonizing seconds, nothing changed. The numbers on the screen remained steady, no spikes, no drops. Max's breath caught in his throat, and then, just as he was beginning to doubt, the system started to hum more evenly, the readings smoothing out. The reactor was stable. "It's working!" Claire exclaimed, her voice filled with disbelief and excitement. Max couldn't believe it. He stared at the data on the screen, his mind racing to process the implications. They had done it. They had fixed the reactor. The system was stable, the energy field synchronized, and the propulsion unit was ready for the next phase of testing. But more than that, Max had proven to himself that he was capable of solving the impossible. The next few days passed in a whirlwind of activity. With the reactor now functioning as intended, the team shifted their focus to testing the full system. The propulsion unit, the power storage, and the reactor, all of it needed to be tested together to ensure they were truly ready for launch. Max and Claire worked side by side, fine-tuning every detail, analyzing the data from each test, and adjusting the system as needed. But as the system began to show promise, another challenge loomed. Elon had been closely monitoring their progress, and it was clear that he was impressed with the advancements they had made. Yet, despite the breakthrough, there was still something else hanging over Max's head. He hadn't heard from Elon directly since their meeting. No further feedback, no new updates. The silence was deafening. Max couldn't shake the feeling that Elon was waiting for something, a final test, a final validation, before he would give them the green light to proceed. And then, one afternoon, Max's phone buzzed with a message from Elon. Elon Musk, I want to see the prototype. Tomorrow. Be ready. Max's stomach dropped. This was it. The moment he had been working toward for so long. Tomorrow, he would have to show Elon that they had solved the problems, that the system was ready. There was no more time for second guesses or tweaks. This was their chance. Max stood in the midst of the test bay, his heart still racing from the successful demonstration. Elon had given him the nod, a gesture that meant more than 1,000 words. They had done it. The propulsion system was stable, the reactor was functioning perfectly, and the prototype was moving closer to reality. But even as the adrenaline began to ebb, Max couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. Max, this is impressive, Elon said, his voice cutting through the hum of the machinery. But the real challenge starts now. This test was just the first step. Now we need to refine it, scale it up, and make it reliable enough for a mission. Max nodded, his thoughts already racing ahead to the next phase. There was still so much to do, so many variables to consider. The test was a success, but it was only one piece of the puzzle. Now, they had to ensure that the system could withstand the pressures of a real mission, a mission that would push the boundaries of what humanity thought was possible. I understand, Elon, Max replied. We've made progress, but we'll need more tests to iron out the details. And then there's the issue of scaling the system. The prototype works, but the real test will come when we try to make it viable for larger missions. Elon raised an eyebrow, clearly intrigued by Max's thoughts. Scaling it up will be challenging. But we've come this far. If anyone can do it, it's you. Max felt a surge of determination. He had worked so hard to get to this point, and now the opportunity to truly change the world was within his grasp. But it was also a daunting responsibility. He had to be careful. This wasn't just a technical problem, it was a matter of human safety, of the future of space exploration. Every decision would be critical. I'm ready for the next challenge, Max said, his voice steady but filled with an undercurrent of excitement. We need to start looking at the long-term integration of the system with the spacecraft. We'll need to work on the energy distribution, the shielding, and the thermal management systems. If we can get those working in harmony, we'll have a system capable of sustaining long-duration space flights. Elon looked at him, his expression thoughtful. That's a good start. But we also need to address the public perception. People are excited about what we're doing, but they'll need to see that this technology is reliable, safe, and ready for deployment. And we need to do it fast. Time is not on our side. Max knew exactly what Elon was getting at. The clock was ticking. The pressure was mounting. This project had already garnered so much attention, and the world was waiting to see what they would do next. But Max wasn't afraid of the challenge. If anything, it fueled him. This was what he had always dreamed of, pushing the boundaries of human achievement, making the impossible possible. I'll get to work on the next phase immediately, Max said, his voice filled with purpose. We'll need to bring in more experts to handle the scaling process. And I'll start looking into the design of the energy distribution system. If we can get that right, the rest will fall into place. Elon nodded, a faint smile appearing on his face. I like your confidence, Max. But remember, this is a marathon, not a sprint. Stay focused. For the next few weeks, Max threw himself into the work. There was no time to waste. Every day brought new challenges, new problems to solve. But with each breakthrough, the sense of possibility grew. The propulsion system continued to perform flawlessly, and the reactor remained stable. The energy distribution systems were adjusted to handle the increased load, and the thermal shielding was modified to withstand the extreme conditions of deep space travel. It was a grueling process. Long hours, countless simulations, and test after test. But with Claire's help, Max felt like they could conquer anything. Together, they built the foundation for something that could change humanity's future, something that could take people to the stars. One day, as Max reviewed the latest data from the energy distribution system, his phone buzzed with a new message. He glanced at it, expecting another update from the team, but it was from Elon. "Elon Musk, I want you to meet with the press. We're ready to go public with this. It's time to show the world what we're doing." Max stared at the message for a moment, his mind racing. The press? He hadn't expected this so soon. They were still in the middle of testing and refining the system. Was it really time to reveal everything? But Elon was right, people were already talking about the project, and the world needed to know the truth. He quickly responded. "Max, are we ready for the public reveal? I feel like we still have some refining to do." "Elon Musk, the system works. You've done your part. Now it's time for the world to see it. Meet me at the press conference tomorrow at noon." Max took a deep breath. The pressure was mounting once again, but this was a pivotal moment. They had come so far, and the world needed to see that this technology was the future of space exploration. It was time to take the next step. The next day, Max stood in front of a crowded press room, the weight of the moment settling on his shoulders. The room was filled with reporters, cameras flashing, and the buzz of anticipation was palpable. Elon stood beside him, his usual calm demeanor giving nothing away. Max took a deep breath and stepped forward. "Good afternoon, everyone," Elon began, his voice smooth and confident. "Today, we are proud to announce a new chapter in the future of space exploration. Thanks to the hard work of Max and his team, we have developed a revolutionary propulsion system that will change the way we travel to the stars. This system is safe, efficient, and ready for the challenges of deep space exploration." Max stepped up to the microphone, feeling a mix of pride and nervousness. The eyes of the world were on him, and it was up to him to show them the promise of what they had created. "This technology is the result of years of hard work, testing, and innovation," Max said, his voice steady. "But we're not done yet. This is just the beginning. We have a long road ahead, but I truly believe that this propulsion system will take humanity further than ever before, beyond the moon, beyond Mars, and into the far reaches of the universe." The room was silent for a moment, the magnitude of Max's words sinking in. The press conference had the feeling of a historic moment. This was the dawn of a new era in space exploration. And as Max looked out at the sea of faces, he knew that the journey was only just beginning. They had taken the first steps towards something incredible, something that could change the course of human history. But the real work was just beginning, and Max was more determined than ever to see it through. The buzz from the press conference had barely settled when Max and his team dove back into their work. The excitement of the reveal was over, but the real challenge had just begun. The world had watched, the press had cheered, but now they had to prove that this was more than just an idea, it had to work, consistently and reliably. Max, Claire, and the team spent the following weeks refining every aspect of the propulsion system, focusing on what would come next: rigorous, unforgiving testing. This would be their chance to push the limits, to truly see if their creation could handle the extreme demands of space travel. Max had always known that the true test of any innovation lay in its ability to perform under pressure, but the weight of the project's significance had never felt more pressing. They were on the verge of a breakthrough, yes, but breakthroughs had a tendency to reveal even more difficult challenges. And Max was determined to meet them head-on. Elon had remained mostly distant since the press conference, allowing Max the freedom to lead the technical side of the project. But there was always an underlying expectation that this had to work. There could be no failure. One evening, as Max reviewed test data in his office, he received a message that made his stomach drop. Elon Musk, I want to see the next test results. We need to make sure we're ready for larger-scale missions. The clock is ticking. Max stared at the message. There it was, the reminder that the clock was always ticking when it came to Elon's projects. Time was always in short supply, and the stakes were always high. Max turned to Claire, who had been working alongside him, analyzing the thermal stability data from the most recent test. We're pushing the system beyond anything we've done before. If it holds, we can proceed with scaling, but we need to be sure. Claire nodded, rubbing her temples as she absorbed the numbers. It's close, but not quite there. We're seeing fluctuations in the heat exchange systems when the reactor reaches full capacity. If we don't address that, it could be catastrophic. Max exhaled slowly. He knew what they had to do. They would need to conduct a full, high-pressure test, one that pushed the system to its absolute limits. It was risky, but it was the only way to find out if the propulsion unit could handle the intense conditions of real space travel. Okay, Max said, his voice resolute. We need to run the test tomorrow. All hands on deck. If it works, we're on the path to the next stage. If it doesn't, we rework it again until it does. The test took place in the sprawling hangar where the prototype had been built, a massive facility designed to simulate the conditions of deep space travel. The test chamber was equipped with all the necessary systems to mimic the extreme vacuum, pressure, and temperature of space, making it the perfect setting for the most critical test yet. Max stood in front of the reactor, inspecting the systems one last time before the test. The engineers moved quickly around him, finalizing adjustments and double-checking every cable, pipe, and sensor. The air in the room was thick with anticipation. This was the moment they had all been working toward, the test that would either prove their theory correct or expose a fatal flaw in their design. Everything is ready, Claire said, her voice steady but full of tension. We're good to go. Max nodded, taking one last deep breath. All right, let's start the countdown. The team gathered at their consoles, fingers hovering over buttons, eyes fixed on the screens. With a click, Max initiated the first stage of the test. The reactor powered up, and the systems began to hum as they slowly built toward full capacity. Max's heart raced in his chest. He watched the readings closely, every number, every fluctuation, every pulse. The pressure was immense, and his mind raced through all the possible outcomes. They were on the edge of something monumental, and it was a delicate balance between success and failure. As the system reached full power, the temperature inside the reactor spiked. The pressure began to climb, and Max held his breath, waiting for the inevitable. Would the heat exchange system hold, or would the reactor begin to destabilize? For a brief, agonizing moment, nothing happened. The reading stabilized, and the system seemed to steady itself. Max exhaled, his body finally releasing the tension that had been building since the test had begun. Are we good? Claire asked, her voice tight with anticipation. Max studied the data. The reactor was holding steady. The heat exchange was within tolerable ranges. The energy output was consistent. Everything was functioning as it should. They were succeeding. Yes, Max breathed, a smile creeping across his face. It's holding. The room erupted in a quiet cheer, a wave of relief washing over everyone present. They had done it. The system had passed the first real test. There were still challenges ahead, still plenty of work to be done, but this was the breakthrough they needed. They were one step closer to realizing the dream of interplanetary travel. But just as Max was about to allow himself a moment of triumph, his phone buzzed again. Elon Musk, good job, but we're not done yet. The next test will need to be even more demanding. Make sure it holds under all conditions. I'll be expecting results. Max stared at the message, the smile fading from his face. He knew what this meant. The breakthrough had been important, but Elon was already looking ahead, focused on what came next. He glanced at Claire, who was watching him closely. "We're not finished yet, are we?" Claire shook her head. "No, Max. The real challenge has only just begun." The next few weeks were a blur. The pressure to perfect the system was overwhelming, and Elon's expectations only added to the weight. Max and his team began preparing for the next phase of testing, which would simulate not just extreme temperatures and pressure, but the full range of stress that a spacecraft might face during long-duration space travel, radiation, cosmic interference, and unexpected system malfunctions. As they prepared the new test chamber, Max was reminded of the enormity of the task ahead. He had started this journey with a vision of space travel becoming accessible to humanity, but now that dream felt more like a mission impossible than ever before. Every test, every simulation, brought new challenges, new obstacles to overcome. But Max had learned something over the past few months: challenges were just part of the journey. They were inevitable. What mattered wasn't the setback itself, but how they responded to it. Max had faced countless moments of doubt since this project began. But every time the system faltered, every time a test failed, he learned something new, something crucial. And each time, he pushed himself harder, determined to find a solution. It was that drive, that unwavering determination, that kept him moving forward. They hadn't reached the stars yet, but they were getting closer. And Max would not stop until they did. The test was set. Max had prepared himself for this moment, the ultimate test that would determine whether their propulsion system could stand up to the harsh realities of space travel. But no amount of preparation could ease the underlying tension in the air. The team gathered around the control consoles, their faces lit by the cold blue glow of monitors as they double-checked the systems one last time. Even the hum of the reactor felt more intense today, as if it too understood the gravity of the moment. Max stood at the front of the testing chamber, his mind racing through every possible outcome. He had worked on this project for months, poured his soul into it, and yet the fear of failure lingered like a shadow over his thoughts. He couldn't afford to let it fail, not just for his sake, but for the entire team, and for the future of human space exploration. "Everything's ready," Claire said, her voice steady but tinged with the same underlying anxiety that Max felt. She glanced over at him, her eyes meeting his with a reassuring look. "We've got this, Max. We've come too far to stop now." Max nodded, grateful for her calm presence. "I know. But this is bigger than just us. If this works, it'll change everything." The countdown began. The large display clock ticked down, each second weighing heavier than the last. The team fell silent as the moment approached. 10, 9, 8, the numbers on the screen seemed to blur as Max's heartbeat grew louder in his ears. 5, 4, 3. With a soft thrum, the reactor powered on, and the hum filled the chamber, growing louder and more intense. The test had begun. Max's eyes flicked to the various readouts, watching the temperature, pressure, and radiation levels as they surged. Everything was within range, everything was stable, for now. But there was something in the air, something subtle, that made Max uneasy. The balance was delicate. They were walking a razor-thin line between success and disaster. Suddenly, the first warning light flashed on one of the control panels. "Max!" Claire shouted, her eyes locked on the monitor. "The radiation shield is failing. We've got a spike in radiation levels." Max's heart skipped a beat. The radiation shielding had been one of their proudest achievements, designed to protect the crew from lethal cosmic radiation during long-duration space missions. If it failed now, the test would be over. They would need to shut everything down immediately. He quickly ran over to her station. "Is it a system failure or just a fluctuation?" Claire's fingers flew over the keyboard, her eyes scanning the data. "It's fluctuating. It's not catastrophic yet, but if the shielding can't stabilize, we'll be in trouble." Max took a deep breath. He couldn't let panic take over. "Increase the radiation damping output manually," he ordered, his voice calm despite the storm brewing inside him. The team worked furiously, adjusting the controls, compensating for the spike. But the radiation levels continued to rise, slowly but steadily. Max could feel the pressure mounting in his chest. This was bad. Very bad. We need to shut it down, Claire said, her voice tight with urgency. If we don't, we'll risk catastrophic damage to the system. Max didn't want to hear it. He refused to believe they had come this far only to fail. They needed to push through. They needed to find a solution before it was too late. He turned to the control panel and began adjusting the reactor's output himself. There had to be a way to stabilize the shielding. His mind raced through the calculations, considering the various variables, but every second that passed made the situation more dangerous. If they didn't fix it now, they could lose everything. A loud hiss echoed through the chamber. Max whipped his head around. The temperature readings were spiking, dangerously high. The reactor was starting to overheat. If it reached critical mass, it could breach and destroy the entire testing bay. The stakes were higher than ever. Shut it down. Now. Claire screamed. Max hesitated for a split second, the weight of the decision settling heavily in his gut. But then, with a swift motion, he slammed his hand down on the emergency shutdown button. The reactor's hum turned into a high-pitched whine as the systems powered down. The lights in the chamber flickered, and the screens went dark. An eerie silence filled the room as everyone waited for the readouts to confirm that the danger had passed. Max's breathing was heavy, his heart still racing. He turned to the team. "Is everyone okay?" Claire nodded, but her face was pale. "We're good, but that was too close. We pushed it too hard." Max swallowed hard, his mind still processing what had just happened. They had failed. The system had almost failed them. But there was no time to wallow in the defeat. They needed to figure out what went wrong, and fast. "We'll need to run diagnostics immediately," Max said, his voice cold but steady. "Find out what caused the shielding to fail. We can't afford another failure like that." As the team began reviewing the data, Max took a step back, his mind spinning. This was the harsh reality of innovation. Success was never guaranteed. They had come close to disaster, but that meant they were one step closer to understanding the system's limitations. Max looked around at his team, who were already diving into the diagnostics, their determination unwavering. They had failed this time, but failure was just another step toward success. They would find the problem. They would fix it. And they would try again. Later that evening, as the test chamber lay silent and dark, Max sat alone in his office, reviewing the data from the failed test. The systems had been pushed to their limits, and while they had ultimately shut it down in time, it had been a narrow escape. He could still feel the weight of the failure pressing down on him. But as he reviewed the data once again, a small glimmer of hope flickered in his mind. They had learned something valuable. They now knew where the weaknesses were, and with that knowledge, they could correct the flaws and move forward. Max picked up his phone and sent a quick message to Elon. "Max, we've identified the radiation shielding flaw. It's not fatal, but we'll need to make adjustments. We'll run another test soon." He waited for a reply. When the message finally came, it was short but to the point. "Elon Musk, good work. Fix it. We're not giving up now." Max smiled slightly. There it was. Elon's relentless drive. The challenge wasn't over, it was just a reminder that the road to success was never easy. There would be more obstacles, more failures, but that was part of the journey. And he would push through, no matter what it took. Max leaned back in his chair, staring at the blueprint for the system on his screen. There were still adjustments to make, still hurdles to overcome. But he was no longer afraid of failure. In fact, he was embracing it. Because failure was simply another step toward success. And Max was determined to take that next step. The following weeks were a blur of intense focus and unrelenting pressure. The team had gone back to the drawing board, addressing the radiation shielding failure and working tirelessly to optimize the propulsion system. Max and Claire spent long hours together in the lab, poring over data, making adjustments, and running simulations. Every day was a race against time, and every moment felt like it could be the one where everything came together, or fell apart. Max had always been someone who thrived under pressure, but this project had stretched him in ways he never imagined. He had always believed that innovation was born from persistence, that success was the result of countless failures. But this time, the stakes were higher than they had ever been before. It wasn't just about a new technology or a breakthrough idea, it was about the future of humanity. About proving that space travel, interplanetary exploration, and maybe even colonization could one day be within reach. But as the days passed and the team worked late into the night, Max couldn't help but feel a growing sense of doubt creeping in. The last test had been too close. The radiation shielding had failed at the most critical moment. What if they couldn't fix it in time? What if the next test failed, too? The thought haunted him, gnawing at the edges of his resolve. But then there were moments of hope. Small victories. The engineers had managed to improve the reactor's thermal resistance, a breakthrough that would allow the system to withstand even greater extremes. The propulsion unit's power output was more stable than ever. And the radiation shielding, though still in the process of optimization, was showing promising results in preliminary tests. It was slow progress, but progress nonetheless. Max leaned back in his chair one evening, staring at the screen in front of him. The design schematics for the propulsion system were laid out in front of him, and he could see how far they had come. The design had evolved, been tweaked, adjusted, and refined to the point where it was starting to look like something that could actually work. But there was still a long way to go. As he stared at the schematics, his mind began to wander. He thought about the future of humanity. Space travel had always been a dream for so many people, a dream that had seemed just out of reach. But now, with this project, it felt like that dream was closer than ever. It wasn't just about getting to Mars. It was about opening up the entire solar system to exploration. About creating new opportunities for mankind. Max had always believed in the power of technology to change the world, but now, he felt the weight of that belief more than ever. Max, Claire's voice broke through his thoughts. We've got something here. He looked up and saw her standing in the doorway, a wide grin on her face. What is it? We fixed the shielding, she said, her voice tinged with excitement. It's holding steady in simulations now. We've made enough adjustments to keep the radiation levels within acceptable limits. The system's stable. We're ready for another test. Max felt a wave of relief wash over him. He couldn't remember the last time he'd felt this hopeful. That's great news. Let's run the test tomorrow. We're not wasting any more time. The next morning, the team gathered in the test chamber once again. The air was thick with anticipation. Max could feel the weight of the moment pressing down on him, but he pushed the nerves aside. This time, he felt more confident. The system had been through the ringer, but they had fixed the flaws. They had learned from the previous test, and now it was time to see if those lessons had paid off. Max stood in front of the control panel, his fingers hovering over the buttons. His eyes flicked from one monitor to the next, watching the readings as they began to stabilize. Claire stood beside him, her face focused, watching the system closely. Ready? Max asked. Claire gave him a nod. Let's do this. Max pressed the button, and the system powered up once again. The hum of the reactor filled the room, and the lights flickered as the energy levels surged. This time, there were no warning signs, no flashes of red or spikes in radiation levels. The system was holding steady. Max exhaled slowly, feeling the tension in his body ease. But there was still a long road ahead. They had made it this far, but this test was just one of many. There would be more obstacles to overcome. More challenges. More failures. But this was a victory, and it was enough to fuel their next steps. As the system reached full power, the team began running diagnostics, checking every detail, making sure everything was working as it should. The reactor's heat levels were stable, the radiation shielding was holding, and the propulsion system was functioning flawlessly. "It's working," Claire said, a smile breaking across her face. "It's really working." Max turned to her, his own grin spreading across his face. "We did it." But before they could celebrate, a new message flashed on the screen. It was from Elon. "Elon Musk, great progress. But we're not done yet. The real test comes when we scale this up for an actual mission. We need to start thinking about what comes next. Get ready for the next phase." Max felt a mix of pride and frustration. Elon's words were both motivating and a reminder that the work was far from finished. But that was the nature of this journey, there would always be more challenges ahead. The road to the stars was long, and this was just the beginning. That evening, Max stood alone in the observation room, gazing out at the darkened horizon. He thought about how far they had come. The road had been tough, filled with setbacks and failures, but they had persevered. And now, the impossible seemed a little more possible. The dream of space exploration, once a far-off fantasy, was slowly becoming a reality. As he stood there, his phone buzzed again. It was a message from his parents. "Mom, we saw the news. We're so proud of you, Max. Keep pushing forward. The world needs people like you." Max smiled as he read the message, feeling a surge of warmth and gratitude. In that moment, he realized just how much this meant, not just to him, but to everyone who had supported him along the way. His parents. His team. The entire world, waiting for the moment when they could all look up at the stars and know that humanity had a future beyond Earth. Max typed a quick reply, then set his phone down. He turned back toward the work ahead, feeling more determined than ever. The road was long. The challenges were many. But he knew that they were on the verge of something extraordinary. And he would not stop until they had reached it. Max couldn't remember the last time he'd had a full night's sleep. The project had consumed him, body and mind, as it always did. Every time he closed his eyes, his thoughts were filled with calculations, simulations, and tests. He didn't mind. He was used to it by now. The relentless pace, the long hours, the constant pressure, it was all part of the job. But it had been different this time. This project felt more than just a job. It felt like a calling. Now that the propulsion system and radiation shielding were working, it was time to move on to the next phase, scaling it up. Elon had already made it clear that they couldn't stop here. The ultimate goal wasn't just a test run. It was a fully operational system, ready for the next generation of space travel. The implications were vast. Human exploration beyond Earth was no longer a distant dream. It was becoming a reality. But that reality came with its own set of challenges. The next phase would involve scaling the propulsion system to handle larger payloads, ensuring it could support a crew, and integrating it into a functional spacecraft design. Each step forward required careful planning, meticulous engineering, and flawless execution. And Max wasn't sure if they were ready. The stakes were too high. The team had been working around the clock, and as the days passed, the pressure only mounted. Max found himself increasingly in need of quiet moments, moments to think, to reflect, and to remind himself why he was doing this in the first place. He stepped outside one morning, his boots crunching in the gravel as he walked toward the observation tower. The sun was just beginning to rise, casting a golden glow over the sprawling facility. It was peaceful here, far away from the noise and chaos of the lab. For a brief moment, Max let himself take it all in. The vast expanse of sky, the distant mountains, the silent promise of space that beckoned from beyond the Earth's atmosphere. He could almost feel the pull, like a gravitational force drawing him toward the unknown. But as always, the moment of peace didn't last long. His phone buzzed in his pocket, snapping him back to reality. He pulled it out and saw a message from Claire. "Claire, we need to talk. Urgent." Max's heart skipped a beat. Claire wasn't the type to overstate things, and if she was calling something urgent, it meant they were facing another challenge. He quickly typed a reply. "Max, on my way." When Max arrived in the control room, Claire was already there, hunched over a set of monitors. She looked up as he entered, her face pale, eyes wide with concern. "What's going on?" Max asked, his voice low, though a knot had already formed in his stomach. "It's the cooling system," Claire said, her voice strained. "We've been running simulations for the larger scale model, and something's not right. The thermal regulation is failing. It's not holding up under the increased power output. If we push this too far, it could overheat, potentially catastrophic." Max's mind raced. This was exactly the kind of thing they had feared. The larger the system, the more variables there were to control. The cooling system had been one of their critical components, designed to keep the reactor at a safe temperature. But now, it seemed like they were facing yet another obstacle. They couldn't afford another failure. They had come too far. "How bad is it?" Max asked, trying to keep his voice steady. "We're still in the safe zone for now, but the system's starting to show signs of strain," Claire replied. "If we don't fix it, the entire system could go into thermal runaway. We'll lose the propulsion, and worse, the radiation shielding could fail again." Max took a deep breath, letting the weight of the situation settle over him. He had hoped that the propulsion system would work perfectly, that they would be able to focus on scaling up the technology without any more setbacks. But that was naive. Innovation wasn't easy, and the challenges didn't stop coming. "We need to figure this out, Claire," Max said, his tone sharp now. "If this fails, we lose everything. This isn't just a small glitch we can fix later. It's a deal-breaker." Claire nodded, determination hardening in her expression. "I agree. I've already run some diagnostics. The cooling units are operating at full capacity, but the heat buildup is higher than expected. I think we need to redesign the thermal conduits. The current setup can't handle the increased power output." Max rubbed his temples, thinking. The new design required a complete overhaul of the cooling system, a change that would take days, if not weeks, to implement. Time was running out. Every second counted. "We can't afford delays like that," he muttered, more to himself than to Claire. "We need to find a temporary solution. Something to keep the system stable while we work on the full redesign." Claire paused, clearly thinking through the options. "There is a way to reroute the thermal conduits temporarily, but it will only buy us a few more hours at most. It's risky, but it's the best we've got for now." Max met her gaze. "Do it." Claire's fingers flew over the keyboard, entering the necessary commands to reroute the system. The large display screens in front of them flickered as the adjustments took effect. Max held his breath as he watched the system's temperature readings. For a moment, everything seemed to hold steady. But then the temperature began to climb again, just slightly. "It's not holding," Claire said quietly. "We need to act faster." Max clenched his fists, trying to ignore the growing tension in his chest. This was the moment when failure felt inevitable. But he refused to give up. Not now. Not when they were so close. "We need backup," he said, his voice firm. "Call in the team. Everyone who can help. We're going to fix this together." The team worked through the night, reconfiguring the system as best they could. Every minute felt like an eternity. They all knew that the test couldn't afford to fail, not after all they had been through. As Max stood in the center of the control room, directing the team and overseeing the repairs, he felt the weight of their collective ambition pressing down on him. At some point, he realized that they had all come to share the same dream, to push the boundaries of what humanity could achieve, to make the impossible possible. Each of them had a role to play in this vision, and none of them could afford to step back now. The road ahead might be full of obstacles, but they had already overcome so much. They had proven time and time again that no challenge was too great to overcome. As dawn broke, the system was finally stable. The cooling system was working within safe parameters again, at least for the moment. But the real work was just beginning. Max stepped outside once more, this time to breathe in the crisp morning air. He knew the journey wasn't over. They still had so much more to do, so many more hurdles to cross. But for the first time in weeks, he allowed himself to feel a sense of relief. They had a long road ahead, but it was a road they were prepared to travel. And he knew, deep down, that they were going to make it. The weeks that followed the cooling system crisis were a blur of activity, each day blending into the next. The pressure to perform was ever present, but Max and his team had adjusted to the relentless pace. They had fixed the thermal issues, redesigned the critical systems, and prepared the spacecraft for its ultimate test. This was the moment they had been working for, the moment that would determine if their dream of revolutionizing space travel was truly possible. Max found himself standing in the control room again, the familiar hum of the machinery filling the space. His hands gripped the edge of the console, his gaze fixed on the test systems in front of him. The room was filled with engineers, scientists, and technicians, all watching with bated breath as the final preparations were made. This time, it was different. This test wasn't just another simulation or another series of incremental adjustments. It was the full-scale trial, the one that would either prove their system was ready for interplanetary travel or condemn it to the scrap heap of failed ventures. Everything was riding on it. Elon had made it clear, there was no room for error. Max turned to Claire, who was seated at the command terminal beside him. She looked calm, but he could tell that she was just as anxious as he was. Her fingers hovered over the keyboard, poised to execute the commands that would initiate the test. Max could see the sweat on her forehead, the way her eyes flicked to the monitors, tracking every little change in the system's behavior. "We've been here before," Max said, his voice low but steady. "This time, we make it work. No second chances." Claire met his gaze, nodding. "We've got this, Max. We've come this far. We won't stop now." The countdown began, and Max's heart started to race. The systems powered up, and the monitors flickered to life. He watched the indicators closely, his breath steady but his mind swirling with 1,000 possibilities. Could they push the system to its limits without it failing? Could they take the next step and prove that this technology could actually change the course of human history? As the countdown hit 0, the first phase of the test was activated. The propulsion system kicked into gear, the hum of the engine vibrating through the floor beneath them. The power levels were steady. Max's heart skipped a beat as the spacecraft's thrusters roared to life. For a moment, everything felt perfect. But then, something unexpected happened. The radiation shielding began to fluctuate. The system showed signs of stress. The data on the monitors blinked red, and the warning lights started flashing. "No, no, no," Max muttered under his breath. He slammed his hand down on the console. "What's going on?" Claire was already analyzing the readings. "It's the new radiation buffers we integrated. The power surge is too much for them. They can't handle the load." Max's mind raced. They had been testing the shielding extensively, but this was the real test, the one that mattered. They had pushed the system past its theoretical limits, and now they were seeing the results. "Shut it down," Max ordered, his voice firm. "Cut the power." Claire hesitated for a fraction of a second, then quickly entered the shutdown sequence. The thrusters cut off, and the systems began to power down. The room fell silent, the tension hanging in the air like a thick fog. Max's pulse was pounding in his ears. They had failed. Again. The dream of space travel, of exploring new worlds, felt like it was slipping further away with each failure. He had thought they were ready, but they weren't. Not yet. Not enough. "We'll need to reassess the shielding," Claire said, her voice calm, though Max could tell that she was just as frustrated as he was. This test showed us where the weak points are. We need to reinforce the buffers and test the energy distribution more thoroughly. Max clenched his fists, his mind racing with solutions. He hated this feeling, the feeling of defeat. They were so close. He knew they could fix it. But it didn't change the fact that they had just hit another wall. We can't afford to be stuck here, Max said, pacing the room. We've come too far to turn back now. What do we need to do? Claire glanced over at him, her expression resolute. We need to redesign the energy regulators. The current design can't handle these power surges. If we don't optimize the way the energy is distributed, we won't be able to push forward. Max nodded, the fire in his eyes reigniting. He wasn't about to let this setback define them. This was just another obstacle. One more challenge to overcome. We'll make it work, Max said firmly. Let's get the team on it. No more delays. We'll do whatever it takes. As the team worked around the clock to redesign the energy distribution system, Max couldn't help but feel the weight of their mission pressing down on him. Each moment felt like it could be their last chance. The pressure to succeed, to make the impossible possible, was overwhelming at times. But every time he doubted, he remembered the people who believed in him, the team, his family, and Elon. Elon's unwavering belief in their success had been a guiding light. Even when the tests failed, Elon had always pushed them to go further, to do more. He never once doubted that they could pull it off. And now, Max had to hold on to that same belief. Late one night, as Max sat at his desk, reviewing the latest test results, his phone buzzed again. He picked it up, expecting another message from the team, but this time, it was from Elon. Elon Musk, remember, the greatest breakthroughs often come from our failures. Don't let this setback shake you. You're on the right path. Keep going. Max read the message over and over again, feeling the weight of Elon's words settle deep within him. He wasn't just leading a team, he was part of something far bigger. This wasn't just about him. This was about the future of humanity. About reaching for the stars. About changing the world. He set his phone down and turned back to the designs on his desk. There was still so much work to do. So many problems to solve. But this time, he wasn't just solving them for the sake of a project. He was solving them for the future. A few days later, the new energy distribution system was ready for testing. The team had worked tirelessly, making adjustments and refining the design until it was as close to perfect as possible. It was time to try again. Max stood in front of the control panel once more, Claire by his side. The entire team was watching, waiting for the next step. The countdown started again, and Max felt his heart race. This time, he couldn't afford to fail. The thrusters powered up. The engines hummed. And then, the energy distribution system kicked in. The radiation shielding began to stabilize. The thrusters powered up even more, pushing the spacecraft forward. The monitors lit up with positive readings. The shielding held steady. The system was stable. Max exhaled slowly, his shoulders sagging with relief. They had done it. After all the setbacks, all the failures, they had made it work. Max turned to Claire, a wide grin spreading across his face. We did it. Claire smiled back, her eyes shining with pride. We're not done yet, Max. But this is a hell of a step forward. Max nodded. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but for the first time in what felt like forever, he felt like they were finally on the right path. The dream of space travel, of exploring new worlds, was within their reach. And nothing would stop him from getting there. Max stood in the dim light of the control room, staring at the monitors, watching the data flow in real time. The test had been a success, but as the team celebrated, he couldn't shake the feeling that they were just at the beginning. The pressure of the project weighed heavily on him, on all of them. The spacecraft was stable, the propulsion system functioning as designed, and the energy distribution system had been optimized. The shielding had passed the test. Yet, Max knew that the hardest part was still ahead. They had made it past the technical hurdles, but now came the real challenge, actual space travel. Max knew that if they were going to launch, they would have to do it soon. There were only so many resources, only so much time, and only so much leeway before things would start to fall apart. Elon's expectations were high, and the world was watching. It wasn't just about making history anymore. It was about making sure everything worked when the stakes were higher than ever. His mind drifted back to the conversations with Elon. Despite all the accomplishments, despite all the progress, Elon never seemed content with the current state. Push further, Elon had said. Make it perfect. We need to get this to Mars, not just orbit. Max was starting to feel that pressure more than ever. He wasn't sure if it was the work, the responsibility, or the constant fear of failure, but something in him had shifted. The excitement of the project, the thrill of innovation, was being overshadowed by an overwhelming sense of doubt. One evening, as Max sat alone in his office reviewing designs, he heard the soft shuffle of footsteps outside his door. He glanced up, surprised to see Claire standing in the doorway, her face tired but determined. "You've been here all day, haven't you?" she said, walking in and taking a seat across from him. "You need to take a break." Max rubbed his eyes, feeling the weight of the last few months pressing on him. He hadn't realized how long it had been since he'd taken time for himself. "I can't afford to. We've got too much riding on this. I can't let this fall apart now." "I know," Claire said gently. "But you're not in this alone, Max. You've built something incredible. We've built something incredible. But we're all human, and we need rest. If you burn out, we all lose." Max met her eyes, and for a moment, he saw the same weariness reflected in her gaze. She was right. He'd been pushing them all too hard. Pushing himself too hard. It wasn't sustainable. But there was no time to slow down. Not now. The launch window was coming fast, and they couldn't afford delays. "I'm fine," Max said, trying to brush it off. "We're too close to quit now." Claire leaned forward, her voice soft but firm. "You know, sometimes the hardest thing to do is let go for a moment. Trust the team. Trust the work we've put in." Max opened his mouth to argue but found that he couldn't. He knew deep down that Claire was right. But the fear of failure gripped him so tightly that he couldn't relax, couldn't give in to the idea of slowing down. Every fiber of his being screamed to keep moving forward. "I can't," he muttered. "We've got too much on the line." Claire sighed and stood up, walking over to the window. She gazed out at the sprawling campus, the lights from the research facilities casting a glow against the night sky. "We all have our doubts, Max. But that's why we work together. We need each other to fill in the gaps, to pick up where one of us falters." Max looked at her, feeling the weight of her words. "I don't want to let anyone down." "You won't," Claire replied with a small smile. "You're not alone in this. We're all in it together." For the first time in days, Max allowed himself to relax, just for a moment. The stress wasn't gone, but Claire's words had reminded him that he wasn't carrying the burden by himself. It wasn't just his success on the line. It was everyone's. The next day, Max woke up with a new sense of purpose. The launch was approaching fast, and it was time to move forward, not with fear, but with confidence. He knew that they had done everything they could to make sure the mission succeeded. The propulsion system was sound. The energy distribution had been fine-tuned. The radiation shielding was stable. The spacecraft was ready. All they needed now was the final test. He stepped into the control room, where Claire and the rest of the team were already prepping for the next round of tests. There was an energy in the room, an excitement, but also an undertone of nervousness. Everyone knew that this was it. The test that would decide whether they could move forward with the real mission. Elon wants us to push the systems to the max, Max said as he stepped up to the command center. We need to test the spacecraft's limits and make sure it can withstand the conditions of space travel, not just a short-range test. Got it, Claire said, her voice steady. We'll run a full-scale simulation with all the critical systems online. We'll push everything as far as we can. The team worked in unison, their actions coordinated, their focus sharp. Max watched as the systems powered up, their energy humming through the control room. The spacecraft was positioned on the launch pad, ready for the final round of testing. The countdown began. The air was thick with anticipation. Max's heart beat faster as the clock ticked down, each second feeling like an eternity. As the countdown hit 0, everything changed. The thrusters roared to life. The spacecraft lifted off the ground, slowly at first, then with increasing speed as it soared into the sky. The monitors flickered as data streamed in, showing the spacecraft's trajectory, speed, and power usage. The critical systems, propulsion, cooling, energy regulation, were all operating within the expected parameters. But then, something unexpected happened. The spacecraft suddenly veered off course, the trajectory readings shifting unpredictably. Max! Claire shouted from across the room. Something's wrong with the guidance system. Max's eyes darted to the screen, where the spacecraft was drifting off course, its engines firing erratically. Panic rose in his chest, but he fought to stay calm. Activate manual override, he ordered, his voice sharp. Bring it back on track. Claire's fingers flew over the controls, but the spacecraft's movements were erratic, as if the systems had suddenly gone haywire. Max's mind raced, this wasn't part of the plan. They had tested the guidance systems thoroughly, so why was it malfunctioning now? The spacecraft continued to veer off course, heading toward a dangerous altitude. The monitors showed the heat levels rising in the propulsion systems, and the radiation shielding began to flicker again. We've got to stop this, Max said, his voice tight. Cut the engines, now. But it was too late. Max stood frozen in the control room, staring at the flickering monitors. The spacecraft, which had moments earlier been a symbol of their greatest achievements, was now nothing more than a malfunctioning piece of machinery. The countdown had not only failed, it had brought them to the edge of disaster. The guidance system was in chaos, and the propulsion system's heat levels were dangerously high. Worse still, the mission was slipping away from them. Cut the engines. Shut it down. Max barked, his voice sharp, snapping everyone into action. The technicians and engineers scrambled to execute the emergency shutdown sequence, but the damage had already been done. The spacecraft's trajectory was still off, and the emergency protocols weren't responding as they should. Every second felt like an eternity. Claire, who had been at the console working tirelessly, stood frozen too, her fingers hovering over the keys. Her eyes met Max's, filled with a mix of disbelief and frustration. We've done everything right, Max. I don't understand. The system should have held. Max took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. It wasn't just the failure that stung, it was the knowledge that they were so close to proving something revolutionary. Yet now, that success felt like a distant dream. He walked over to the console, his eyes scanning the data as it poured in. The guidance system was off, way off, and nothing they did seemed to correct the error. He ran his fingers through his hair, trying to think through the problem. This wasn't a simple malfunction. There was a deeper issue at play, and they didn't have time to waste figuring it out. Elon was counting on them, and the world's eyes were on the project. It's not over, Max said, more to himself than anyone else. We'll figure this out. The next few days were a blur. Max, Claire, and the team worked around the clock, analyzing every piece of data, revisiting every system that had been tested, and recalibrating the spacecraft's components. They were determined to find the root cause of the issue. It was a challenge unlike any they had faced before. Max could feel the strain weighing on everyone, his team, himself, but they couldn't afford to slow down. There was no time for doubt. By the third day, the team had found something. The problem wasn't in the propulsion or cooling system. It wasn't in the radiation shielding or energy regulation. The malfunction came from a critical update they had made to the spacecraft's AI system, the same AI that was supposed to control the spacecraft's guidance system. A rogue line of code had inadvertently caused the system to fail, sending the spacecraft veering off course. Why didn't we catch this earlier? Max asked, slamming his fist on the desk, the frustration bubbling over. He knew they had all poured their energy into perfecting the spacecraft, and yet, something as simple as a coding error had brought everything to a halt. Claire stood next to him, her expression unreadable. We were so focused on the hardware, Max. We didn't give enough attention to the software. We've always worked under the assumption that the AI would be flawless. This was a blind spot. But now we know what we're dealing with. Max took a moment to compose himself. This was just another obstacle, another hurdle that they had to overcome. It was part of the process. It had to be. If they gave up now, everything they'd worked for would have been for nothing. And they had come too far to quit. We'll fix the code, he said, his voice steady. Let's get the AI back online. We'll test it in the simulation before we try another launch. The next several days were filled with debugging, testing, and fine-tuning the AI. Max and Claire worked closely with the software team, ensuring that every line of code was optimized for the spacecraft systems. They ran simulations over and over again, testing every scenario and eventuality. Slowly, the glitches were ironed out, and the guidance system began to behave as expected. On the seventh day after the failed launch, they were ready to run another test. Max stood in the control room once again, his palms sweaty but his resolve stronger than ever. He knew that the next step was crucial. They had no more room for error. Claire was at her station, her fingers moving with practiced precision. The team was in position, watching the countdown timer on the big screen. The spacecraft sat on the launch pad, fully powered and ready to go. Max felt a knot of tension form in his stomach as the countdown began. "Here we go," Claire murmured, her voice calm yet filled with the gravity of the moment. "All systems are green. Guidance is stable. Propulsion systems online." Max swallowed, watching the timer count down from 10. He forced his breath to steady, telling himself that this time would be different. 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, liftoff. The spacecraft's engines roared to life, and for the first time in days, Max felt his heart lift with the spacecraft. It ascended, slowly but surely, into the sky. The hum of the engines, the vibrations through the floor, the readings on the monitors, all of it was perfect. The guidance system was working. The propulsion system was stable. The spacecraft was on course. Max could hardly believe it. After everything they had been through, they had finally reached this point. The success wasn't just in the liftoff. It was in every second that followed as the spacecraft made its way into the higher atmosphere. They were breaking through the layers of uncertainty, pushing the limits of what they had ever imagined possible. "This is it," Claire said, her voice tight with emotion as she glanced over at Max. "We're doing it." Max nodded, his heart swelling with pride. "We are." The spacecraft soared higher, reaching an altitude where the curvature of the Earth became visible in the distance. They had made it. They had proven the system could work. But as the spacecraft ascended, Max knew that this was just the beginning. They had cleared a major hurdle, but the road ahead was still long. There would be more tests, more challenges, and more risks. But for the first time in what felt like forever, Max allowed himself to feel a moment of triumph. He had faith in his team. He had faith in the mission. And together, they would change the world. The test had been a success. The spacecraft had launched, and the systems had worked. Max, Claire, and the entire team had taken a significant step toward realizing a dream that had once seemed impossible. But even as they celebrated their victory, they knew that they were far from finished. This was just the beginning. The next few days were filled with constant updates to the spacecraft systems and software, as well as endless rounds of analysis. There was no such thing as resting when your goal was something as monumental as Mars colonization. Each new development brought them one step closer, but it also brought with it new complications, new risks, and new challenges. As the days passed, the pressure continued to mount. Elon, ever the visionary, had already set the next target. They were no longer focused on simply reaching orbit. Now, the goal was to prepare for the long journey to Mars. The world's eyes were now firmly fixed on the mission. Media outlets covered every detail, from the tiniest progress update to the more sensational headlines. SpaceX's latest launch, the beginning of Mars colonization. The world watched as the spacecraft systems continued to improve, the spacecraft itself making its way toward deep space testing. Max couldn't help but feel a sense of pride when he saw the news stories. They had made it into the history books, even if the journey was far from complete. But that sense of pride was quickly followed by an even heavier sense of responsibility. Their next test was crucial. The spacecraft would need to stay in orbit for an extended period of time, far longer than the brief test flights they had conducted up until now. If everything went according to plan, this would be the test that would solidify their progress. But if something went wrong, it could send the project back to square one. There was no room for failure. Max was pacing his office one night, alone, when Claire stepped in. Her face was tense, but there was a quiet determination in her eyes. "Max, we need to talk," she said. Max stopped pacing and looked at her, his mind still tangled in thoughts about the spacecraft. "What's going on?" Claire hesitated for a moment before speaking. "We need to start preparing for the next phase. The orbital test is one thing, but what happens after that? What about the deep space travel system? The energy needs for that are astronomical." Max rubbed his eyes. "I know. I've been thinking about it too. The spacecraft has to function beyond just a short-range test flight. The real challenge is figuring out how we can sustain power over the long term. If we can't solve that, everything falls apart. We've been running some simulations," Claire continued. "And we might have an answer. It's going to push the boundaries of what we think is possible, but we may be able to develop a new energy storage system that could last for years in space." Max raised an eyebrow, intrigued. "Go on." Claire sat down, pulling up a schematic on her tablet. "We're looking at the concept of a hybrid propulsion system. The idea is to combine solar energy with a new form of fusion battery storage. We could generate power from solar energy while storing excess power in a hybrid system that's more efficient than anything we've tested before." Max was silent for a moment, processing what Claire had said. "That's a huge leap, Claire. We'd need to test it on a scale that we've never done before. The risks." "I know," Claire interrupted. "But if we pull this off, it would be a game changer. It's the only way to sustain long-term space travel. It's ambitious, but it's possible." Max took a deep breath. This was the kind of innovation that could define their legacy, or destroy it. He couldn't help but feel the weight of it. They had already made so much progress, but this was different. They were not just on the edge of something remarkable, they were standing on the precipice of something that could change the future of space travel forever. "We'll need to run this by Elon," Max said. "If he's on board, we'll need every resource we can get. If we fail," he didn't finish the sentence, but the implication hung in the air. They couldn't fail. Later that week, Max and Claire were in a high-stakes video call with Elon, discussing the new energy system they were proposing. Elon's face was set in its usual, determined expression as he listened intently to their pitch. "This hybrid propulsion system, it's risky," Elon said once Claire had finished explaining the concept. "But I like it. We're not trying to do anything easy here. If we succeed, it'll revolutionize space travel. But we have to be prepared for setbacks. We could be years away from making this work on the scale we need. Max leaned forward, his voice firm. We've already pushed the boundaries with the spacecraft. If we can solve the energy problem, we'll be ready to take the next step, deep space travel. And once we've proven that, Mars will be within our reach. Elon nodded slowly. All right. Let's make it happen. You've got my full support. Move quickly, but cautiously. Don't let the risks blind you, but don't let fear hold you back either. You've got a team behind you. Max felt a surge of confidence. They had just received Elon's endorsement. The next phase was on, and they would need every ounce of determination they had to succeed. Days turned into weeks, and the team dove headfirst into developing the hybrid propulsion system. Testing began immediately, and Max watched as the project progressed. There were setbacks, inevitable failures, but each time they stumbled, they learned more, adjusted their approach, and moved forward. Claire was relentless in her pursuit of perfection, while Max balanced his role as the team leader with the constant pressure to deliver results. It wasn't just about the technology anymore. The eyes of the world were on them, and they were acutely aware that each test, each breakthrough, was being scrutinized by millions. One day, as Max reviewed the latest data, he received another message from Elon. Elon Musk, status update, how are we doing? Max took a deep breath before typing his reply. Max, we're on track. The hybrid system is showing promise. We're testing the first prototype tomorrow, and we're optimistic. It's a huge leap forward, Elon. Moments later, the response came in. Elon Musk, good. But remember, Max, you're not just building a spacecraft. You're building the future. Make sure it's the right future. Max stared at the screen, feeling the weight of those words. They weren't just building a ship or a system, they were building humanity's future. The pressure was immense, but so was the potential. He couldn't afford to fail. And he wouldn't. The countdown to the next phase was on. And this time, they would be ready. The days flew by, each one filled with intensity and urgency. The hybrid propulsion system was still undergoing rigorous testing, with mixed results. Max knew it wasn't a matter of if they would succeed, it was a matter of when. But the weight of the world's expectations hung heavily on him and the team. They had set themselves up for greatness, and now they had to deliver. Max found himself often standing in the observation room, gazing out over the launch site. The gleaming spacecraft stood at rest, its sleek, futuristic shape a constant reminder of the mission's magnitude. Beyond that, there was a vast, endless horizon, an ocean of possibilities. But for now, they were stuck. Stuck in this moment of uncertainty, of pushing forward without knowing exactly what lay ahead. It was a feeling he had grown used to, but that didn't make it any easier to bear. One evening, as Max sat in his office reviewing reports, a knock on the door interrupted his thoughts. Claire entered, her face a mixture of excitement and concern. Max, I think we've cracked it, she said, her voice bright with anticipation. Max stood up immediately, a surge of hope running through him. You've got something? Claire nodded, her eyes wide with excitement. We've reworked the energy storage system, made some significant adjustments to the way the hybrid propulsion integrates with the solar collection. The power output is stable, and we've doubled the efficiency. We're getting close to the numbers we need for deep space travel. Max's heart raced. You're telling me we can actually pull this off? We could be ready for the long journey. We're getting there. It's still going to take time and a few more tests, but this is huge. If the prototype performs the way the simulations predict, we could launch in weeks, not months. The weight on Max's shoulders felt lighter for the first time in weeks. They were on the brink of something monumental. The pieces of the puzzle were falling into place. Max and Claire walked to the testing lab where the new energy system prototype had been set up. Engineers and scientists were already running final diagnostics, monitoring every detail. Max couldn't help but feel a sense of awe as he watched the team at work. They had come so far, no one could have predicted how far they'd come when they first started. Claire leaned in and whispered, "This is it, Max. If this works, it changes everything." Max nodded, his heart pounding in his chest. This wasn't just about engineering or technology anymore. This was about humanity's future, about making space travel a reality for the next generation. This was the key to unlocking Mars. "We need to make sure everything goes according to plan," Max said, his voice steady despite the storm of emotions brewing inside him. "One mistake, one miscalculation, and we could lose it all." "I know," Claire replied. "But we've done the math, we've tested every system. We're as ready as we can be." Max turned his attention to the console as the countdown to the test began. The prototype was about to be powered up, its energy system put to the test for the first time. The whole team was watching, their eyes glued to the screens, as the various readings came to life. The numbers flickered on the display, energy levels, efficiency, power output, all within expected parameters. The test ran for what felt like an eternity, each second stretching into a nerve-wracking pause. Then, finally, the confirmation came. "It's holding," one of the engineers shouted. "We're holding steady. Power levels are stable, the hybrid system is fully operational." A cheer erupted in the room, and Max felt his breath escape him in a relieved sigh. They had done it. The new propulsion system was stable, and it could power a deep space journey. It wasn't just a theoretical achievement, it was real, tangible. They were on the verge of sending humans farther than anyone had ever gone before. Later that night, Elon called Max. The strain in his voice was gone, replaced by a tone of cautious optimism. "Max," Elon began, "I've been following the test results. You've all done incredible work. This hybrid propulsion system, it's exactly what we need for the next phase. But I need you to keep pushing. This is just the beginning. The journey to Mars won't be easy. It will take everything we've got." Max nodded, even though Elon couldn't see it. "We're ready for the next step. We'll keep refining the system, but this is the breakthrough we've been working toward." "You've built something extraordinary," Elon said. "But don't forget, the hard work isn't over yet. You're not just pushing the boundaries of technology. You're pushing the boundaries of human capability." "I understand," Max replied, his voice firm. "We'll be ready." After the call, Max stared at the stars through his office window. He thought about Elon's words, about the responsibility they all carried. It was one thing to be on the cutting edge of technology, it was another to carry the weight of the future of humanity on your shoulders. But Max knew one thing for certain, they couldn't stop now. They had come too far to turn back. And if this next phase succeeded, they would be on the cusp of something far greater than anyone could have imagined. Max stood by the observation window, the glow from the spacecraft's launch still vivid in his mind. He could feel the hum of excitement coursing through the control room as everyone on the team celebrated the success. They had launched the spacecraft into the next stage, and everything had gone according to plan. But for Max, the sense of accomplishment was bittersweet. There was still so much work to be done. The spacecraft was now on its way to simulate the deep space journey that would ultimately take humanity to Mars. The hybrid propulsion system was working as intended, but that was only part of the challenge. The real test would come when the system was put to the ultimate test, extending the journey to Mars, with all the variables of long-term space travel to contend with. The celebrations in the control room grew louder, but Max didn't join in. Instead, he walked back to his office, alone with his thoughts. His phone buzzed in his pocket, and he pulled it out to see a message from Claire. "Claire, we did it, Max. But this is just the start. We've got a lot more work ahead of us. Are you in?" Max smiled at the message. He had always known Claire was as committed as he was to the mission. Their shared vision, their shared sacrifices, had brought them to this point. But the road ahead would require even more dedication, more perseverance. He quickly typed a response. Max, always in. This is just the beginning. He hit send, and with a deep breath, he looked out the window at the stars. For so long, they had been unreachable, beautiful, distant lights that seemed so far away. Now, they were a destination. They were a future. And in that future, humanity would go further than anyone could have ever dreamed. A few days later, Max found himself in another high-stakes meeting with Elon. The results of the long-duration test flight had come in, and everything was on track. The spacecraft had proven itself capable of withstanding the rigors of deep space. The hybrid propulsion system was performing better than expected. The energy storage system had been validated. But as Elon had warned, this was just the beginning. "We've accomplished a lot," Max said, sitting across from Elon in a conference room, "but now comes the real challenge. We have to refine everything for the Mars mission. We've proved the technology works, but the scale of the mission will push everything to its limit. We can't afford any missteps." Elon leaned forward, his piercing gaze locked onto Max's. "You're right. The next phase is critical. But remember, Max, this isn't just about reaching Mars. It's about laying the foundation for future generations. We've only scratched the surface." Max nodded, understanding the weight of Elon's words. "We'll do whatever it takes. We'll make it work." Elon gave him a small, approving smile. "That's the spirit." As the weeks passed, the work on refining the spacecraft and the hybrid propulsion system continued. Max and his team had gone from a small, idealistic group of engineers to a highly efficient team of experts, working together to build the future. They had tested their systems, and now they were fine-tuning them, preparing for the next great leap forward. But something had shifted in Max. The closer they got to the Mars mission, the more he realized the gravity of what they were doing. This wasn't just a scientific endeavor. This was a step toward becoming an interplanetary species. They weren't just sending a spacecraft to Mars, they were sending humanity's future. The weight of this responsibility was immense, and Max often found himself reflecting on the people who had come before him, the pioneers who had dreamed of reaching the stars but had never seen that dream realized. He thought of the astronauts, the scientists, and the engineers whose work had laid the groundwork for this moment. Their legacy was woven into everything they were doing. Max also found himself thinking more about the people who would come after him, the next generation of scientists, engineers, and dreamers. What would they be able to accomplish? How would their lives be shaped by the work Max and his team were doing now? On a quiet evening, just as Max was about to leave for the day, Claire stopped by his office. "I was just thinking," she said, her voice thoughtful. "We've come so far, but the real work starts now. Mars isn't just a place, it's a new home. It's going to require a whole new way of thinking. We're not just building a spacecraft, Max. We're building the foundation for life on another planet." Max nodded, his mind racing. "I know. And the challenges we face are unlike anything we've ever dealt with. But if we can make it work, if we can get to Mars and sustain life there, we'll change the course of history." "I've been reading a lot about the first colonies," Claire continued. "How they had to adapt to survive in a completely new environment. There's a lot we can learn from their mistakes." Max leaned back in his chair. "What do you mean?" "Survival," Claire said, her eyes bright with excitement. "It's not just about technology. It's about creating the right conditions for people to thrive. The psychological challenges of being on Mars, the physical conditions, they'll all be new. But we have to prepare for all of it. And we will." Max smiled. "You're right. It's not just about getting there, it's about creating a new beginning." Claire nodded, a determined look in her eyes. "We're not just pioneers. We're architects of the future." The next few months flew by in a blur of testing, planning, and refinement. Each step they took brought them closer to their goal, but also made the task ahead feel even more daunting. Max had known that getting to Mars would be hard, but now he was realizing just how much more was required. The mission was bigger than he had imagined, and it was becoming clearer every day that the true challenge wasn't the technology. It was creating a sustainable, thriving human presence on another world. And yet, despite the enormity of the task, Max knew one thing for certain: this was the future. The work they were doing wasn't just for them. It was for everyone who would come after them. The world would be watching, and the stakes were higher than ever. The day of the Mars mission launch finally arrived. The spacecraft was ready, the crew was trained, and the hybrid propulsion system was operational. Max stood alongside Elon and Claire on the launch pad, watching as the countdown to liftoff began. The rocket engines roared to life, and the spacecraft slowly began its ascent. As it shot into the sky, Max couldn't help but feel a profound sense of awe. This was it. This was the beginning of humanity's journey to the stars. And as the spacecraft disappeared into the vastness of space, Max knew that they had just opened a new chapter in human history. The future had arrived. And it was just the beginning. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough?